Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
A boy with bright blonde hair and dark eyes sat in the back of the bus, wearing his high school uniform. The ride home always took forever. His family lived out in the rural edge of town, so he filled the time with the only thing he loved: reading. He pulled out his phone, opened the familiar web novel app, and scrolled to his library. One title caught his eye: Path to Ascension. Author: Athex. Chapters: 4,291. Status: completed. It's finally finished, he muttered, surprised. He'd followed the story for years, since his first year of high school. After catching up months ago, he'd stockpiled nearly 400 chapters. But when he tried to remember what happened last, his mind drew a blank. He barely remembered anything past the early arcs. Guess I'll just reread from the start. With average grades, no friends, and nothing but games and novels to occupy him, rereading a favorite didn't sound so bad. He tapped the first chapter. Blank. Maybe just a glitch. He tried the second. Blank. The third. Blank again. He flipped all the way to chapter 20. Nothing. A sigh escaped him. Great. Guess I'll just continue where I left off. He tapped the continue button, only for it to open at chapter 20, the one he'd just scrolled to. Right. Overwritten. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, frustrated. And then the bus lurched. The crash. Whoa, what's going on? Students screamed as the vehicle shook violently. The blonde-haired boy's body rattled with every bump. The driver, he's asleep. A burly student with brown hair sprinted to the front, shaking the wheel. Gas broke out. He's passed out, he's pale. Anemia or something. Panic spread like wildfire. What do we do? A girl shouted. There's only one way, the burly boy barked. We jump once I hit the brake. But we'll die if we jump at this speed. Better than flying off a cliff. He stomped on the brake. The bus shrieked as it slowed, then crashed through an iron fence, the nose of the vehicle dangling over a cliff. The frame groaned, threatening to give way. Go! Move! The leader kicked open the door, hauling the unconscious driver out first. One by one, students jumped to safety. The blonde-haired boy tried to follow, but in the crush of bodies, he stumbled. Feet trampled him in the rush. His ribs burned with every step pressed into his chest. Hurry! The bus is falling. They poured out until he was the only one left. The bus tilted. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He staggered up, trying to reach the door, but gravity betrayed him. The bus tipped over the cliff. He laughed hollow. What the fuck? Trampled, left behind, the unluckiest one of all. Resigned. He pulled out his phone to send a last message to his mom. But the app that opened wasn't messaging. It was the novel, Path to Ascension, except the title was glitched, warped with symbols. Asterisk, pop %, hashtag T0, a 3% dollar caret, and on. What the hell is this? The ground surged closer. Boom. The awakening. Darkness. Then. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 1. Class, Anomaly. Rectangle, you are an entity that does not belong to this world. An anomaly. Passive. Rectangle, Skill Weaver. Create any skill possible within the user's capacity. +1 skill slot per level. Total skills, 0 to 1. Stats. STR, F. MPF. Def F. AGIF. Int F. Charm F. System Shop. System Inventory. System Coins, 0. Quests available, 0. How am I still alive? The boy's eyes fluttered open. He wasn't crushed under a bus or lying in rubble. Instead, he was in a bed, soft sheets, an unfamiliar room. Confusion piled in his chest until something caught his attention. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 1. EXP, 0 out of 100. Class, Anomaly. Rectangle, an entity that does not belong to this world. Passive. Rectangle, Skill Weaver. Create any skill within the user's capacity. +1 skill slot per level. Skills. None. Stats. STR F. MPF. Def F. AGIF. Int F. Charm F. System Shop. System Inventory. System Coins, 0. Quests available, 0. A system interface? He'd seen one like this before, in Path to Ascension, the web novel he had followed religiously. But I died. I should be dead. Instinctively, he reached for his pocket. His fingers brushed a familiar rectangle. A phone. He unlocked it. 5 a.m., Monday, June 1st, 2148. From Astria Academy. Congratulations, Mr. Brandon Locke. Your application has been accepted. We look forward to welcoming you on campus. His breath caught. Astria Academy. The most prestigious school in the novel. The very place where the story began. There is only one explanation. I'm inside the novel. A character that never existed. He read the message again. Recipient, Brandon Locke. The name meant nothing. No such character had ever appeared in the story. He remembered the cast clearly. An extra. The thought made him sigh. Even in another world, he wasn't the protagonist. But then his eyes returned to the system. Skill Weaver. He reread the description, and his jaw dropped. Create any skill? That's completely busted. Even the protagonist didn't start with something like this. Whoever Brandon Locke was meant to be, he wasn't ordinary. And now he was Brandon Locke. First steps. System close. Nothing happened. Exit. Clear. At the last word, the screen winked out. Nice. But how do I open it again? He swallowed, then tried. System. The interface reappeared. Haha, genius. Testing complete. He stood, scanning the room. A mirror caught his eye. The reflection stunned him. Pale hair, icy blue eyes, a lean but muscular frame. Taller, broader, stronger. Am I 6 feet tall? He laughed, almost giddy. In his old life, he'd been short, skinny, unremarkable. But the smile faded as a memory returned. His mother. The final moments before the crash. The message he never sent. Tears welled up. He crouched, clutching his face. Mom, I'm sorry. You're alone now. She had raised him alone in the countryside, given him everything she could. For him, she was perfect. And now he'd abandoned her forever. He sobbed until his chest ached. Finally, he forced himself up, wiping his eyes. If I can't go back, then I'll make this life count. The rush. He checked the time again. 6:47 a.m., Monday, June 1st, 2148. Wait, doesn't the academy start today? He scrambled into the bathroom, showered, threw on clothes from the closet. By the time he left the apartment, it was already 7:43. The hallway was strange, but the exit sign guided him. Outside, the city stretched into the sky, towers of glass and steel, crowds buzzing on the streets, cars streaming past. He froze. Where is Astria Academy, exactly? The novel had never mentioned its exact location. Then he spotted Salvation, a yellow taxi pulling up nearby. Perfect. He waved it down, slid into the back seat, and barked, Astria Academy. Step on it. The driver grinned. That's my specialty, kid. The car shot forward, and Brandon's second life truly began. Astria Academy, located in the capital city of Astria on the continent of Sirith. Arriving at Astria Academy, Brandon looked at the taxi driver in horror. He realized he had no money. Sir, that'll be 10 copper coins. Cold sweat beaded out from Brandon's forehead. He had just arrived into this world. Of course he would have no money. He didn't know what the currency looked like, only remembering the vague details from the novel. It's not like the novel would go into detail about the currency in the first place. After breathing out a sigh, Brandon shifted his gaze towards the window where the academy was, in plain sight. The academy stood tall and elegant. It was nothing like Brandon had ever seen in his previous world. He could see students already bustling about, making their way towards the campus. Some of them were dropped off from cars. Brandon could tell they were in the higher class of society. Sir, are you going to pay or not? Brandon shifted his gaze from the academy back to the driver and said, Can I put in my tab? It's Raven Blackheart, by the way. Brandon could only bluff his way through this. There was nothing else he could do. He didn't want to become a criminal. And Raven Blackheart was the name of the protagonist. It was the only name he could remember at the time. Click. Instantly, Brandon unlocked the door and tried to get out as fast as he could. Hey, sir. Brandon could hear the taxi driver screaming in panic behind him. Remember, It's Raven Blackheart, okay? Sir. Brandon paid no mind to the taxi driver as he made a run for it, heading towards the academy's entrance. Brandon stood in front of the door of the classroom. A201. He was informed that this was the lecture room for his first class when he beckoned to check at the student's booth for his schedule. It seemed that A stood for Astria as 201 minutes second floor first room. Brandon let out an exasperated sigh. He wasn't a bad student in his previous life or anything, just average grades. But he realized that since this was a different world, it meant they had a different curriculum. And since Brandon had only recently arrived in this world, particularly 3 hours ago, then he'd be way behind his peers. But that wasn't the only problem he had. He was late. To be precise, he was 20 minutes late. After standing in the door frame for what seemed to be a few minutes, Brandon finally entered the lecture room. As he entered the lecture room, Brandon felt several glances his way. No, everyone's eyes were fixed on him. Shifting his gaze towards the professor, Brandon was already familiar with who she was. Vanessa Grace, with hazel brown hair and peach eyes. She had the kind of curves that would instantly bewitch any man, and Brandon would be no exception to this, except that his mind was occupied with how he could get out of the situation. Not only that, but if she's the professor for this class, then that means... Brandon shifted his gaze from Vanessa to a peculiar student seated on the front row. Jet black hair and ocean blue eyes, a well-built frame, with facial features that were considerably handsome. It was none other than the protagonist of the story, Raven Blackheart. Snapping him out of his thoughts, Vanessa suddenly spoke up. "Are you in the wrong classroom?" Brandon fixed his gaze on her. There was no need to feel embarrassed. For Brandon, it all felt like a role play. "No, Miss Vanessa, I was informed that this would be my first class." Vanessa tilted her head in response. "Oh, so you already know who I am." It was then when Brandon realized that he had just blurted out her name, even though he wasn't there for the homeroom. Now, Brandon was nervous, unsure of how to get his way out of this. Due to rushing towards the lecture room, it didn't occur to him that he wasn't supposed to know who Vanessa was. But if there's one thing Brandon was good at, it was bluffing. After gathering his thoughts together, Brandon composed himself, standing tall and confident. "Yes, miss. I've read about you in the articles, and I have to say I'm one of your fans." It was true. Due to her beauty, Vanessa was a popular mage that would often appear in magazines. But this was when Brandon made a blunder. The kind of magazines Vanessa would show up in were none other than model magazines. Oh fuck, did I just let the entire class know that I'm into those kind of things? Brandon felt a cold gaze from Vanessa as she narrowed her eyes. "Well, thank you. But I'm not sure how to feel about that when a 16-year-old boy is the one telling me." But Brandon composed himself once again. He had to see to this until the end. "As your fan, I couldn't help but admire you. Actually, I'm really nervous as I'm standing before your presence." A natural actor. He could hear laughs and murmurs from several students who were seated in their place. "Sai, just take your seat." Brandon flashed a smile and nodded. Brandon felt all the gazes flashing towards him as he headed towards an empty seat. He switched his gaze towards the student that sat beside the empty seat. With jet black hair and ocean blue eyes, it was Raven Blackheart. Brandon flashed him a smile and said, "Looks like we're neighbors now. I'll be in your care." Brandon had closely followed Raven's journey when he used to read Path to Ascension, so he already knew what kind of personality Raven had. If you were to sum it up, Raven was your typical goody-two-shoes protagonist, someone that would easily be taken advantage of. He's way too kind for his own good. Raven returned his smile with a gesture of his own and said, "Likewise, nice to meet you. My name is Raven Blackheart." Brandon settled in, taking his seat, and responded, "Nice to meet you as well. I'm Brandon Locke." Raven nodded with a smile and switched his gaze to Vanessa, who was about to continue the lecture. Brandon turned his head and took a quick glance at the students seated behind him. As he scanned each student, one of them locked eyes with him. A female student with long pitch-black hair, dark crimson eyes, clear jade skin. Her facial features were beautiful, perfectly symmetrical, with soft, succulent lips. When Brandon saw her, he already knew who this was. Rachel Asami, one of the main cast members. Pretty. Brandon was immediately attracted to Rachel. He couldn't help it. He was a teenage boy with zero romantic experience. Just getting the attention of a beautiful girl like Rachel was enough to make him falter. Brandon continued to scan the other students, trying to find more members of the main cast. And his goal was soon realized as he locked eyes with another student, albeit a male student. Reinhard Van, with deep red hair and ink-black eyes, another seemingly handsome student. He's supposed to be Raven's best friend. But for now, the two seem to not be acquainted yet. When Brandon finally gathered his thoughts together, he realized where he currently was in the story. PFTT. Is he using a sword? Mockery and chatters were audible, but they weren't directed towards Brandon. Rather, they were directed towards another male student, Raven Blackheart. Right, this was how the earlier chapter started. Brandon thought to himself, in a world filled with mages, Raven was one of the few minority who decided to pick up the sword. For magic users, they were referred to as mages, while weapon users were referred to as duelists. In the beginning, he was often looked down upon just for that sole reason. Idiots, this guy will become the strongest in the future. After all, he was the only one with the privilege of having a system. Well, that was until I showed up. After being dismissed by Vanessa, it was finally time for combat class. Since not all students opted for this subject, there were new faces that filled the training room. And this is where most of the main cast met each other. Brandon glanced around at the students who were practicing their magic. Because he already knew who to look out for, it was easy to discern each student. In Brandon's left, there was a peculiar female student who seemed to be practicing her lightning magic. Claire Victoria, one of the main casts. She continued to channel her lightning magic on to the magic orb. Her short lavender hair continuously swayed at each lightning strike, as her purple eyes seemed to stay fixated on the orb. To Brandon's right was another peculiar female student. With long, lustrous blonde hair and crimson eyes, Amy Ashfield, another member of the main cast. She was also channeling her magic onto the magic orb. Actually, besides Raven, everyone was channeling their mana onto the orb. It was instructed by the professor to better gauge each student's current capabilities. The goal was simple, to destroy the orb with the amount of magic they had. But what do I do? Brandon didn't have any magic skills. He was clueless as a monkey. Should I just use that skill now? They were all lined up by alphabetical order, as each orb was presented before them. The professor then would observe and evaluate each student, trying to gauge their potential. If I'm right, he should still be in the B section. After all, the professor was observing none other than Raven Blackheart. Since he didn't have any magic, he was instructed to destroy the orb with his sword. Compared to using magic, it would be harder to destroy the orb with just blunt force. The magic orb would usually react to mana instead. Once there was enough output, it would then shatter. Before he gets here, I should probably create a skill by now. After deciding, Brandon thought to himself, Skill Weaver. Type the description of the skill you'd like to weave. Since we're using magic orbs, I should create a skill related to magic. In this world, each individual was born with mana. They would usually be attributed to one element. But there were special cases where they were attributed to two or more. Individuals who possess more than one attribute are usually called deviants. There's no room to compromise. I should create the best skill available as soon as I can. There was only one answer. Manipulate all the elements. Error. You do not meet the level requirements for this skill. Instead, you can choose two elements, given the following: fire, water, earth, wind, nature, lightning, ice. They all sound powerful, but which one should I choose? Brandon was never one to seek attention. Since he was inside the novel, it would do more harm than good if he disrupts the plotline. Hence, he planned on staying low for the time being. If he was found using two elements, he would most likely be the center of attention. He would be regarded as a deviant, and there was no point in doing that, which is why he decided that he would only use one element, regardless if he had two. For the time being, at least, he inconspicuously tapped the system, since he would look like a weirdo clicking air. After all, only he could see the system. He realized this when he tried to sneak a glance at Raven during the first lecture. Raven seemed to be moving his index finger at nothing. But of course, Brandon knew he was using his system. After pondering for a while, Brandon had finally decided. Are you sure? Yes. Initializing Skill Weaver. Downloading data. ETA 1 minute. As Brandon waited for a while, the system notified once again. Skill Weaver successful. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 1. EXP. 0 out of 100. Class, Anomaly. Right angle, you are an entity that does not belong to this world. An anomaly. Passive. Right angle Skill Weaver. Right angle, create any skill possible within the user's capabilities. Right angle, increase your capacity by +1 per level. Right angle, total skills. 1 out of 1. Skills. Right angle, elemental manipulation. Right angle ice. Right angle lightning. Stats. Right angle STRF. Right angle MP. F. Right angle def. F. Right angle AGI. F. Right angle int. F. Right angle charm. F. System shop. System inventory. System coins. 0. Quests available. 0. As the information was being uploaded in his head, Brandon suddenly felt an excruciating stabbing pain on his temple. Ag. All the information about how to use the given elements instantly flashed inside Brandon's mind. After a few minutes, the pain finally subsided, and his head became clear. Brandon took a good look at the magic orb in front of him, and just in the nick of time, it seemed like the professor finally made it to him. The professor stood behind him. Student number 26, Brandon Locke, show me what you can do. At the professor's instructions, Brandon lifted his arm forward, his palms facing the magic orb. Then, crackle. Channeling mana from his core, Brandon weaved the mana threads, materializing lightning. Blue sparks of energy emitted from his arms, and as they made their way towards the magic orb. Crack. PSHHH. The magic orb shattered instantly. Brandon felt several glances his way, and when he turned to look, he saw the professor, wide-eyed, as his mouth contoured to a silent O shape. Glancing at the other students, their gazes lingered on Brandon as well, as their eyes were also wide open. Phenomenal. You are a once-in-a-lifetime talent, Mr. Brandon Locke. It was then when Brandon realized he was the first student to have shattered the magic orb. Fuck. So much for trying not to draw attention. His days of laying low had ended before it even began. After the combat class ended, a crowd had formed around Brandon. He was barraged with a multitude of questions by the students. Hey, you're Brandon Locke, right? Where did you learn magic? Are you currently single? If you don't mind, could you give me some private magic lessons? Hey, don't make him uncomfortable. These were the kinds of words that reached Brandon's ears. It's not like lightning magic was rare or anything, but they could all agree that Brandon was really skillful with it. There were some students, mostly male, who did not chime in and called Brandon a fluke. In all actuality, it was mostly the female students that surrounded Brandon. In this new body, Brandon was considerably handsome. The moment he entered the first lecture, he instantly became the topic between the girls. It was the start of his popular phase. He felt more like the protagonist than the protagonist ever did. Aren't I supposed to be an extra? But since Brandon was a down-to-earth virgin, he didn't know how to react to it. Stuttering and fidgeting, all Brandon could ever utter was It was then when the professor noticed this and had to put a stop to it. Everyone, give the boys some space. At his instructions, the girls that surrounded Brandon immediately gave way. Brandon fixed his gaze on the professor and nodded as if saying, "Thank you." With that, they were officially dismissed. As Brandon was making his way towards the exit, he was abruptly paused by a male student with jet black hair and ocean blue eyes. It was Raven Blackheart. "Hey, Brandon, wait up." Brandon turned around to meet his gaze. It's not like they had become close friends. After all, they had only been acquainted recently. But this wasn't so bad. If Brandon were to stay close to Raven, then protecting him would be easy. Since Brandon was an anomaly, he wasn't sure just how much his appearance would impact the story. The events during the combat class definitely didn't happen in the main storyline, and Brandon knew that. It was supposed to be Amy Ashfield to have shattered the magic orb first. Brandon thought to himself, but because of his performance, Amy came in second instead. As Raven made his way beside Brandon, they both headed out together. Walking side by side, Raven spoke up, "You were really cool back there, man." Brandon scratched his cheek, feeling embarrassed. Having this kind of conversation, even getting complimented by someone he had closely followed for a long time, still felt surreal for Brandon. For the entirety of his first year in high school, Brandon had binged Red Path to Ascension. And now the character he'd read about was now standing beside him, giving him compliments and such. "You're even more amazing than me, you know?" Haha. Thanks, but I didn't even shatter the magic orb. It was the truth. Raven gave it his all, but he had barely scratched the magic orb, no matter how much force he swung with his sword. But Brandon didn't care. He knew Raven was the typical weak to overpowered protagonist. And despite all the struggles he faced in the earlier chapters, Raven never lost his way. A real hero through and through. It was then when Brandon's phone suddenly buzzed. BRT. BRT. Retrieving his phone from his pocket, he realized he was receiving a call. Brianna Locke. Who is this? Curious, Brandon accepted the call and placed the phone near his ear. As soon as he did that, he could hear a woman's voice coming from the phone. "My baby boy, how are you? Are you settling in well? Have you been eating properly?" Brandon was taken aback at the sudden interrogation. It seemed like the woman closely knew him. From just the last name and the way the woman spoke to him, he concluded that it could be Brandon Locke's mother. But he had to confirm. If he were wrong, then it would arouse suspicions that he wasn't Brandon Locke. "Hello, who is this?" "Geez, stop joking around. Don't tell me you've forgotten the voice of your own mother." It seems like Brandon was right. "I'm only joking around." "Mother? Mom." He was unsure how Brandon would refer to his own mother. "Mother? Ha ha. Don't tell me those noble kids finally rubbed off on you, Brandon." Brandon tensed up. It seemed like his new mother had quite the personality. "Of course not, Mom. Anyway, why did you call? Am I not allowed to call my own son, who moved out 2 weeks ago?" 2 weeks ago, huh? Brandon thought inwardly. "Of course you can. I was just curious, since you haven't called recently." When Brandon checked his contacts, he noticed that he hadn't received any call within the past 2 weeks. Of course, he didn't know any of the contacts that were saved in his phone. At first, he thought Brandon Locke was an orphan, since it seemed like no one was looking for him. But now, there was a woman who introduced herself as his mother. Because of this, Brandon once again remembered his mother from his previous life. It made him feel sorrowful, but there was nothing he could do anymore. There was no way to go back. Snapping him out of his thoughts, his mother continued. "Things have just been busy recently. Anyway, have you finally met up with your sister?" "Sister? So Brandon Locke had a sister." "No, I haven't yet." "Do you know where she is? Did moving out finally made you forgetful? How could you forget where your sister is when she's supposed to be there with you in the academy?" "Yeah, but I haven't seen her. Maybe she took the day off?" Brandon was a master of bluffing. "That's impossible. Your sister is an honor student. She must have been busy." "Ah, you're right. I'll meet up with her later." I'll end the call now. Make sure to attend your lessons, okay?" "Of course. You don't have to worry about that, Mom." "Good. Anyway, take care, Brandon." "You too, Mom." Beep. Brandon let out an exasperated sigh. Just that phone call alone drained his entire being. Bluffing with the taxi driver was one thing, but pretending to be someone's son made him feel guilty. It didn't occur to him at first, but now that he thought about it, what happened to the real Brandon Locke? Snapping him out of his thoughts, Raven spoke up once again. "Was that your mom?" "Yeah, sorry about that." "It's fine. It seems like your relationship is really good." At those words, Brandon felt like something tugged at his heart. He knew just what kind of past Raven had, and he could say that it wasn't a pleasant one at all. Hence, Brandon tried to change the topic. "We'll be late at this rate. Let's head to the next lecture now." Raven nodded in response. The two quickly made their way towards the lecture room for their next class. Physical training. Brandon and Raven arrived in what seems to be a white room. It was time for physical training, a session where mages and duelists stood equal. It was a mandatory class. Therefore, mages were forced to take this class as well. It was an unwritten rule in Astria Academy, but the students knew there was a clear hierarchy between mages and duelists. Mages would continue to stand at the top, while duelists were often discriminated against, which is why this situation happened. Huh. Brandon let out an inward sigh. The mage faction had gathered together, forming a group, while the duelist faction gathered and formed their own separate group. Imaginary sparks flew between the two factions, as each of them looked at each other with obvious disdain. Since Brandon had no other friends besides Raven, he decided to gather together with the duelist faction. Due to this, the two factions decided to fight for him. From a mage faction, "Hey, you're Brandon Locke, aren't you? Why are you on their side? Aren't you a mage? Yeah, get over here. Why are you with those duelists?" And from the duelist faction, "You don't have the right to tell him what to do. Just leave him alone. Yeah, don't just tell him to go wherever you please." Brandon could only shake his head at this ridiculous debate. From his side, Raven spoke up. "Just ignore them, Brandon." "Huh, I know." It was then when another student chimed in, placing his arm around the two's shoulders. "I agree with both of you." Raven tilted his head, confused by the sudden appearance of a third party. Do we know you?" Brandon reacted differently. He already knew who this was. Apologies. My name is Reinhard Van. I'm a mage. But I'm not like those idiots, so don't worry." Brandon responded in return. "Nice to meet you. I'm Brandon Locke, right? I've seen your performance back in combat class. Good stuff, man." Brandon once again scratched his cheek in embarrassment. This was another character he had closely followed back in his reading days. After all, Reinhard Van was one of the main casts, and would soon become Raven's best friend. Raven responded as well, flashing Reinhard with a smile. "And I'm Raven Blackheart. Nice to meet you." "Likewise." Reinhard gave a smile of his own. The students around them continued to debate. It wasn't even about Brandon anymore. As their voices were getting louder, a familiar figure entered the training hall. Vanessa Grace, followed by a muscular man with brown hair and blue eyes, adorned with a beard. When they made their appearance, the voices immediately settled down as each of the students fixed their gazes at the professors who had just arrived. Vanessa garnered their attention with a stern voice and said, "Apologies for being late. I had some matters to attend to." She then switched her gaze at the professor beside her and continued, "You might be wondering who this is, so allow me to introduce him." Once again, Brandon already knew who exactly the man was. Gavin White, one of the strongest duelists in the world. The man who would soon become Raven's mentor. There was a reason why Vanessa, a mage, had brought Gavin, a duelist, along with her for physical training. The discrimination against duelists only stems in Astria Academy. It wasn't a trope that occurred on the outside. The professors were already made aware of this, and since physical training was a mandatory class, it didn't matter if a student were a duelist or a mage, they had to take this class. Hence, there would be obvious opposition from the duelists if a mage, Vanessa, was the one in charge of physical training. To settle the dispute, she'd brought Gavin along, a duelist. As Vanessa finished introducing Gavin, it was time to get down to business. Thus, Vanessa instructed, "For today's first session, we will test each student's physical aptitude." After stating those words, Vanessa pressed a button from behind her. Click. KSHHHHH. As soon as she pressed the button, the white room started expanding. Crack. As the room continued to expand, a large mountain started gradually materializing out of thin air. The room was filled with audible gasps. The students were surprised at the sudden change within the room. After the mountain finished materializing, Vanessa beamed with pride as she turned to look at each student's surprised faces. This is the pride of Astria Academy, the virtual simulation room. It was more like this was where their tuition fees went, but they didn't need to know that. Vanessa continued explaining. "You might be wondering what that huge mountain will be used for." Vanessa then turned to look at Gavin. "Allow Mr. Gavin to explain." The students seemed to get the gist of what today's session would be about, evident by their expressions. Gavin noticed this, and at Vanessa's signal, he spoke up with a rough voice. "As you've guessed, you students are going to climb that humongous mountain. He paused for a brief moment, then continued as he explicitly emphasized, "But remember, no magic. All of you will have to climb it with your own physical capabilities." After all, it was a physical training session. The duelist faction, already expecting this, had a look of confidence in their faces. The mage faction, on the other hand, wore looks of worry. Despite being mages, there was no point in being a battle mage if you didn't have sufficient physical capabilities, which is what physical training class was for. Gavin once again instructed, "Now, please form a line. Each of you will be timed as soon as you start climbing." Gavin continued and gave a set of criterias. Under 5 minutes, A. Under 10 minutes, B. Under 15 minutes, C. Under 20 minutes, D. Over 20 minutes, F. As he finished giving the criterias, there were audible complaints from the students, mostly from the mage faction. "This is ridiculous. You expect us to climb that thing in under 5 minutes? Yeah, scratch that. Under 20 minutes is impossible already." They continued on, letting their contempt evident. The duelist faction, who beamed with confidence, retorted, "What a bunch of sissies. Astria Academy only expects the best of the best." He's right. If you can't even handle this, what's the point of even attending the academy? The mage faction could only continue to show their disdain. It was then when Vanessa sternly stated, her peach eyes glowed and her brows furrowed, "I didn't want to have to resort to this, but..." As soon as she paused, she used gravity magic to press down on the students with immense pressure. Some of them bent down due to the weight, and some continued to fight back against the pressure. Vanessa then continued, "If any of you drop out of this, you will be met with expulsion. If you get an F, you're expelled as well. Am I clear?" The students instantly settled down, unable to say anything, as fear was evident from their expressions. It seemed like they forgot that Vanessa was a top-ranked mage in the Citadel. There was nothing they could do but reluctantly agree. Noticing this, Vanessa gave a stern nod. "Good, now line up." A few minutes had passed since the physical training began. Brandon was a few students away until it was his turn. So far, there hasn't been a student that was expelled yet. The reason for this was because most of the mages decided to line up all the way to the back, most likely not wanting to even take the ridiculous mountain climbing session, while the ones who lined up in the front were none other than the duelists. Yet despite that, there wasn't a single student that had gotten an A yet. Brandon sighed inwardly. He remained silent throughout the entire ordeal. But in truth, he was just as nervous as the mage faction. Despite having a satisfactory build, Brandon wasn't confident in his physical capabilities. This stemmed from his previous life as an unathletic, skinny teenager, and it seemed to have carried on in this life as well. Raven, who was in front of him, seemed to notice this as he said, "Don't worry, I think you'll do well." "You think?" Just do at your own pace. AD is fine, as long as you don't get expelled." "I don't even think I'll get AD." It was then when something familiar popped up in front of Brandon's view. System notifications, 1. As soon as that happened, Brandon muttered to himself as silently as he could. System. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 1. EXP, 0 out of 100. Class, Anomaly. Rectangle, you are an entity that does not belong to this world, an anomaly. Passive, Rectangle Skill Weaver. Rectangle, create any skill possible within the user's capabilities. Rectangle, increase your capacity by +1 per level. Rectangle, total skills, 1 out of 1. Skills, Rectangle Elemental Manipulation. Rectangle Ice. Rectangle Lightning. Grades, Rectangle STR, F. Rectangle MP, F. Rectangle Def, F. Rectangle AGI, F. Rectangle Int, F. Rectangle Charm, F. System Shop. System Inventory. System Coins, 0. Quests available, 1. Quests available. He continued to inconspicuously navigate the system and tapped on the Quests Available tab. Quests. Climb the mountain in under 15 minutes. Rewards. Stat points, 3. System coins, 50. Penalty. Failure to accomplish this task will get your lightning attribute locked for 7 days. Fuck. Then that means I'll be forced to use the ice attribute, which will expose him as a deviant. Brandon then closed the system. This time, he let out an audible sigh. Raven turned around once again. What's wrong? Nothing. Okay. After waiting for a while, it was finally Raven's turn. At Gavin's signal, Raven instantly bolted from his position. Cheating bastard, Brandon thought to himself. The results were obvious. Despite having no magic, Raven was in a league of his own when it came to his physical capabilities. A complete opposite of Brandon. Plus his class. It was Assassin, a speed-type combatant. There is no doubt that Raven would be ranked first in the physical training session. His speed was incomparable as he had already reached half the mountain in just 2 minutes. The awes and surprise were audible from the students behind Brandon. Whoa, is he even human? How is he so fast? Does anyone know who that student is? As someone asked that question, it was Vanessa who answered. Raven Blackheart, a duelist. Gavin chimed in as well, responding to Vanessa, who knew we had a student like that. His capabilities are definitely above average, even for a duelist. Vanessa continued the conversation as she glanced towards Raven, who was about to reach the top of the mountain. Actually, he's the examinee who was graded the highest in the physical attribute criteria. Oh, I heard about that. So that's him, huh? It was finally time for Raven's main protagonist moment. Brandon, however, holy shit, it's about to be my turn. Can't Raven slow down? He expected this already, but he couldn't help but be anxious. As soon as he composed himself, Raven had already finished, as he took the portal that led to the bottom of the mountain. When Raven returned back to where the students were lined up, Vanessa stated, Raven Blackheart, for minutes and 27 seconds, and congratulations. Once again, the room was filled with audible gasps of surprise. First, it was Brandon during combat class. Now, it was Raven in physical training. They were monsters in their own specialties. Finally, it was Brandon's turn. As he was making his way to the bottom of the mountain, Vanessa tapped his shoulder. I've heard about your performance during combat class. Not bad. Let's see how you fare here. Expectations. For the first time in his life, there was finally someone who had expectations for Brandon. He couldn't disappoint Vanessa now, as he composed himself, giving her a confident nod. However, Brandon Locke, 14 minutes and 57 seconds, AC, congratulations. Brandon let out an exasperated sigh. It wasn't bad, but he wished he could have done better. At least I didn't get the penalty. As soon as he finished, a system message popped up. Quest completed. Rewards obtained. Stat points, +3. System coins, +50. Bonus reward for completing your first quest. EXP, +50. Whoa, sweet. As he closed the system message, Raven tapped him on the shoulder. What are you doing? Raven tilted his head. In nothing. Okay, good job, man. I told you you'd do well. It felt sarcastic, coming from someone with superb physical abilities. At least, that was how Brandon felt. Thanks. After a while, the physical training session finally ended, and the students were ranked accordingly. First, Raven Blackheart. Second, Claire Victoria. Third, Reinhard Van. 127th, Brandon Locke. 227th, Amy Ashfield. 228th, Rachel Asami. There were a total of 527 students, in which 43 were expelled. Cries of anguish and frustration were audible from the students, while the others who passed shuddered in fear. They finally felt the pressure, the reality of Astria Academy, an institution that did not allow any compromise. Once you fall short, expulsion is expected. If you wish to stay, then prepare to give it your all. If you don't think you can make the cut, then it's better to just drop out and not waste anyone's time. To think I would have been expelled as well if I were any later. Brandon thought to himself. With that, they were officially dismissed. It was their final class for the day. With all the classes seemingly about to end, Brandon and Raven parted ways for now. As Brandon was about to head out for the exit, he soon realized something. He had no money to commute back home. Not only that, but he didn't even remember where his apartment complex was. Because he was rushing, it didn't occur to him to remember the directions the taxi took as it headed for the academy. Huh. Brandon let out a heavy sigh. But regardless, he decided to head outside anyway. Just as he was about to leave, a voice called out for him, particularly a female voice. Brandon. Brandon turned around to trace back the source, only for his gaze to land on a woman. He took in her appearance, pale white long hair, ice blue eyes, with facial features that would put idols from his previous world to shame. There was no doubt in his mind who the person was. This is definitely Brandon Locke's sister. Snapping him out of his thoughts, the girl spoke up. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Hey, lady, a blunder, but he did it on purpose. Lady, Mom told me you've been forgetful lately. Don't tell me you've forgotten about your own sister. I definitely did. What's your name? He decided to continue the act. He didn't know her name. He couldn't make a fatal mistake. Stop joking around, Brandon. No, you could be a fake, disguising as my sister. Give me your name now. Whatever, it's Belloc. Happy now. What's the name of our parents? It was the perfect chance to dig out more information. At this moment, Brandon felt like a total genius. Seriously? Huh. Mom is Brianna Locke, and Dad is Omar Locke. What a waste of time. How gullible. Brandon gave her a wide smile. Okay, that confirms it. You really are my sister. Belle rolled her eyes. Whatever, at least you waited for me. Let's head home now. She then went ahead of Brandon. Brandon's ears perked up at the mention of home. How convenient. She's definitely paying, right? Okay. Sis. Belle furrowed her brow, glancing back at Brandon. What? Nothing. Heading out, Belle called for a taxi, and the two immediately got inside the back seat. Belle gave the driver instructions of where the apartment complex was located. Of course, Brandon took in every detail. He couldn't afford to waste the gold mine of information that Belle had. Brandon then turned to look at Belle, who sat beside him. Hey sis, you're paying, right? Belle furrowed her brow once more. We'll split. I'm under an allowance, just like you. Allowance? I don't remember receiving one. But he couldn't tell her that. Well, I think I blew through mine already. Sigh. How irresponsible, fine. But you'll have to treat me to something nice next time. Sure, thanks, sis. If I had any money. From just the few interactions, Brandon concluded that Belle was older than him. But how old? He was unsure. Hey, sis, how old are you again? You've been asking too many questions, you know? It's like you just woke up one day with dementia. Something like that. Brandon thought to himself. Come on, just tell me. Belle could only give in to his relentless pestering. I'm 17 years old. Okay? Okay, thanks. Since Brandon was 16, that meant Belle was only a year older. After that, the taxi ride was smooth sailing. The two did not speak to each other the whole time. Their gazes lingered outside the window, taking in the sights of the city. At least, that was on the surface. The whole time, Brandon thought of ways on how he could quickly make money. And as a novel reader who had knowledge of the future, there was only one answer. Stocks. I'm a genius, Brandon concluded within his thoughts. And where was he supposed to gain the funds for investing? During the car ride, Brandon finally had time for himself to explore the system interface. As he browsed through the system shop, his astonishment skyrocketed. There was an option to convert system coins into gold coins. Apparently, the conversion rate was 1 system coin equals 10 gold coins. There was no way Brandon wouldn't take advantage of this. Finally, his days of being poor from his old life, until now, has finally come to an end. Currently, he had 50 system coins, which meant he could get a total of 500 gold coins. He was unsure how much gold coins were actually worth, which is why he had to ask Belle. The two had finally arrived at their apartment. Entering their room, Belle immediately sat down on the couch as Brandon followed suit. Turning towards his sister, Brandon asked, Sis, how much was the rent again? This time, Belle had no remarks, as she immediately answered, I think Mom pays a single gold coin a month. I see. Despite sounding like a small amount, the apartment was spacious and lavish. It was clear to Brandon that anyone who lived in the complex was in the upper class of society, which gave him the idea that his family was well off. Yet for some reason, I didn't get an allowance. Since his new family were practically strangers to him, he didn't want to ask them for money. His conscience couldn't handle it. He'd already taken over their son's body. What more could he take from him? With the information that the apartment was worth a gold coin, Brandon concluded that a single gold coin was worth a substantial amount. Curious, he surfed the web on his phone. On his screen, displayed the conversion amount of each coins. Coin conversion rate. 100 copper coin equals 1 silver coin. 100 silver coin equals 1 gold coin. 100 gold coin equals 1 platinum coin. It seems like it doesn't end with gold coins. Brandon continued his research, and with his findings, he concluded 1 platinum coin equals 500,000 US dollars. 1 gold coin equals 5,000 US dollars. 1 silver coin equals 50 US dollars. 1 copper coin equals 0 US dollars and 50 cents. Thus, Brandon had decided to convert all of his coins. Are you sure you want to convert all your coins? Yes. Processing. Your coins will be placed in your inventory. Complete. Instantly, Brandon checked his inventory. It all seemed too good to be true at the moment. And to his surprise, the coins were really there. The last thing I need to do is to use up my stat points. But where? Stats. Stat points available. 3. Right angle STR F. Right angle MP F. Right angle Def F. Right angle AGI F. Right angle Int F. Right angle Charm F. Brandon pondered for a while. He realized during the physical training session that he definitely lacked in the speed department. But since his current build was focused on magic, increasing his intelligence stat was the obvious choice. Thus, Brandon decided to distribute accordingly. Right angle AGI F. Right angle Int F. With that, he closed the system. Brandon had already decided which company he was going to invest in. Deus Conglomerate. But since he was still in the early stages of the novel, it meant that Deus Conglomerate was still Deus Company. The company would soon boom into a corporation by the time the main protagonist, Raven, became a second-year student. And in the further future, they would conquer the market and become a conglomerate. Currently, it was the perfect time to invest in the company, as the stocks were still affordable. But for now, Brandon didn't have a bank account under his name yet. Brandon's gaze then lingered outside the window. Since the sun had yet to set, there was still time to open up a bank account and make a deposit. Having decided, Brandon abruptly stood up and motioned towards the door. From behind him, Belle was alerted. "Where are you going?" "Just going for a walk. Don't wait up for me." "Hey!" Click dash. Brandon closed the door before Belle could continue. Making his way outside, he gestured for a taxi, getting inside, and sitting on the back seat. He'd done his research as well on the top banks of the world. He already knew his destination. "Northern Bank, please." The taxi driver then stepped on the gas. Thud dash. "You have leveled up. You have received 5 bonus stat points." Raven Blackheart had entered the system's dungeon floors to grind for levels. With a dagger in his hand, he swiftly took out a horde of goblins his way. Slash dash. After recently receiving a system, he did not hesitate to take advantage of it. Whenever he had free time, he would quickly dive into the dungeon floors. Currently, he only had access to the first floor. Once he clears the dungeon floor, he will then gain access to the second floor. The system's dungeons had a total of 100 floors, with each floor progressively increasing in difficulty. Slash dash. Quickly maneuvering about, he continued to slaughter each goblin within his sight. Despite the beliefs of him being a duelist, he actually had access to mana. It was just that he had no skills capable of using it. After clearing the horde of goblins, he muttered to himself, "System. Name, Raven Blackheart. Level, 3. EXP, 150/3000. Class, Assassin. Right angle as the one who left it all behind. You have become one with chaos. Passive, right angle Assassin's Rush. Right angle every step you take. Your speed stats increase by 1 point, maximum 10. Skills, right angle Eye of Judgment. Right angle see the move an individual is about to take in the next second. Stats. Stat points available, 5. right angle STR, F plus, right angle MP, F, right angle DEF, F, right angle AGI, F plus, right angle int, F, right angle charm, F, system shop, system dungeon, system coins, 200, quest available, 0. Panting, while gasping for air, Raven slumped down on a nearby wall. It was truly an exhausting experience. The difference between Raven's and Brandon's system was that Raven's was 10 times harder to progress than Brandon's. But in return, he had access to the system dungeons, which Brandon didn't have, meaning he had more opportunity for growth than Brandon. Raven stared at his system, reminiscing his hardships and struggles. Raven grew up from humble origins, but one day his family mysteriously disappeared. He deduced that they had abandoned him, in turn, made Raven envious of people with good families. Life was a struggle for him. Having no magic nor talent for the sword, he took up a lot of part-time jobs just to feed himself. But it was when he got conned by his employer when Raven finally had enough. He wanted to end it all, and thus he did, but failed. After attempting to jump off a building, he realized he survived the fall with no injuries at all. It filled him with questions, confused about how he survived in the first place. And when he opened his eyes, what met his line of sight was a peculiar system interface. Finally, it was time to turn his life around. He instantly delved inside the system dungeon, but soon remembered he had no talent for the blade. Struggles after struggles, and he finally managed to kill a single goblin. With his initial debut, Raven continued to hone his skills inside the dungeon, to the point where he actually slept there. And when his skills were sufficient enough, he decided to admit himself into Astria Academy, where the best of the best only survived. Undoubtedly, his journey had brought him so far. After resting for a while, Raven retrieved a healing potion from his inventory, chugging it down. Gulp! After drinking the potion, Raven's injuries instantly healed, as if he never had them in the first place. He then stood up and muttered to himself, "Okay, back to work." Brandon laid on the couch, grinning to himself, as he continued to stare at his phone. On his screen displayed the stock market, particularly Deus Company's profile. After setting up a bank account, he deposited all his coins and received a credit card with his account information. When he returned to the apartment, he instantly bought 3 platinum coins worth of Deus Company shares, leaving him with 2 platinum coins for use. For the next few hours, Brandon just continued to stare at his phone, astonished about his first investment. This was the first time he had done such a thing in both lives, so he couldn't hold back his excitement. From the corner of his eye, Belle spoke up while laying on her bed. Weirdo. Brandon didn't care. He was about to be rich. Whatever Belle threw his way wouldn't affect him at all. Okay, that's enough. I guess I gotta head to bed, Brandon thought to himself. He placed his phone back in his pocket and headed directly to bed. He didn't even take a shower. Inside a 3-story building, a man sat at the desk of his office. His expressions were contoured to a frown, most likely out of frustration, as he ruffled his hair. Staring at the documents on his desk, he heavily sighed. At this rate, the Deus Company will go bankrupt. The man was none other than Charles Deus, the CEO of Deus Company. It seemed like the company was facing financial problems. In a document, the financial performance was recorded 1 month ago. As he slumped down on the table, he suddenly heard footsteps coming to his office. Thud, thud, slam. The door slammed open, as his assistant abruptly entered the room. Boss, you gotta see this. Charles seemed like he was too exhausted, but he listened to his assistant anyway. What is it this time, Aiden? With an anxious look, Aiden quickly made it in front of Charles's desk. Aiden held his phone up for Charles to see. Charles skeptically scanned the contents of the phone, only for his eyes to shoot wide open. As he stood up abruptly, he shifted his gaze from the phone to Aiden. What? Is this real? Without a doubt, boss. I've checked with the logs as well. The transaction is real. Did you trace the account information? Already done that. It was linked back to a 16-year-old named Brandon Locke. At the mention of a teenager, Charles skeptically furrowed his brow. This must be a prank, right? How can a teenager have that much money? I'm not sure, boss. But regardless, The shares have already been transferred to him. What kind of madman would buy the shares of a failing company? Charles then narrowed his eyes and added, unless it's a rich kid just throwing his money around. Aiden then responded, regardless, boss, this could save our company. Charles nodded, slumping back down in his seat. You're right. Go and find information about him as soon as you can. Make sure you call him as well. At his boss' instructions, Aiden solemnly nodded and made his exit. Charles leaned back on his chair, pondering to himself. 3 platinum coins, huh? Just what kind of man are you, Brandon Locke? Kook. Brandon jolted awake from his slumber. Drowsily grabbing his phone, he opted to check for the time. 9:20 a.m. Holy shit, I'm late. Again. Brandon got up instantly, entered the bathroom, and rinsed his face. After rinsing, he immediately put on his signature black sweater and black pants. Once again, he didn't take a shower. Arriving once again in the same 8201 room, Brandon checked the time on his phone. 9:57 a.m. His schedule usually starts at 7:30 in the morning. Basically, he was late for almost 3 hours. Late again on his second day. He allowed a heavy sigh. Entering the room, once again, all eyes were on him. Venice turned to glance at Brandon, furrowing her brows. Good morning, Brandon Locke. Do you have any idea what time it is? Brandon straightened his posture, trying to be nonchalant about the whole thing. Time for a second chance? Just find a seat. Vanessa seemed like she had enough of Brandon's witty remarks. At her instructions, Brandon did just that. But it seemed like the seat next to Raven was taken. Roaming around, there was an empty seat just near the back of the class. As Brandon took a seat, his gaze landed on Rachel Asami, who sat next to the empty seat. Brandon flashed her a smile, greeting her warmly. Hello. It seems like we're neighbors today. Rachel met his gaze. Her expressions were nonchalant. Good morning, Brandon Locke. Brandon was surprised at the fact that someone like Rachel remembered his name. Oh, you know my name? Yes, you've been quite popular lately. I'm Rachel Asami. Now, Brandon already knew who she was, but she didn't need to know that. At the mention of popular, Brandon was quite curious. Popular? Me? He couldn't believe it. He'd never gotten that kind of attention in his past life. So what made it so different in this life? Maybe it's because I'm Hans. Before he could finish his thoughts, Rachel spoke up. It's because people have been calling you a fake, I think. Rachel tilted her head. Her expressions remained cold. During combat class, there were several male students who thought Brandon was just lucky. Most likely, it was further proven during physical training when Brandon got a mediocre grade. Since he was considerably popular with the girls, it seemed like the guys had a grudge against him. Brandon just shrugged it off. He was used to being a target of bullying. Even in this life, some things never change. No, he now had power. He didn't want to stay a pushover forever. With a determined gaze, Brandon turned to look at Rachel. As he was about to speak, his phone buzzed. BRT, BRT. But of course, he didn't take the call. He was in the middle of a lecture after all. He was already late. He didn't want to anger Vanessa even more. As he dropped the call, his phone buzzed once more. It seemed like whoever the caller was really wanted to get in contact with him. Brandon then retrieved his phone, checking for whoever the caller was. When he saw the phone number, Brandon's eyes shot wide open. He knew who the number belonged to. After all, before he made an investment, he did his research on the company. It was none other than Dea's company. Brandon raised his hand, trying to get Vanessa's attention. What is it, Brandon? I'd like to go to the bathroom. It seemed like Vanessa didn't mind, as she gave him the go signal. As he left the classroom, Brandon retrieved his phone and dialed the number back. Instantly, the call was picked up on the other end. Click. Suddenly, a man's voice reached Brandon's ears. Hello, is this Brandon Locke? Brandon then composed himself, trying to sound professional, making his voice sound deeper. Yes, speaking. This is Dea's company. Our CEO would like to meet you, Mr. Locke. Could you let us know when you're free? Of course. I'd be honored to meet the CEO. I'll be free after 4 p.m. Okay, could we schedule a meeting at 6 p.m.? That sounds about all right. I'll be there. Great. We'll text you the location. We'll be expecting you, Mr. Locke. Beep. Brandon's lips curled up to a grin as the call ended. He had already expected for Dea's company to call him soon. After all, he was the major shareholder, giving him significant influence over the company. Just like that, Brandon solved his financial problems. Asterisk, asterisk. Charles Dayas stood by the window of his office, scanning the city's night lights. Mr. Locke should arrive soon, he thought to himself. Despite being grateful for Brandon, Charles was still skeptical about the whole thing. After all, they had tracked down and discovered everything there was to know about Brandon Locke. The fact that he was a 16-year-old student somehow made Charles underestimate Brandon. But of course, he couldn't judge a book by its cover, which is why he couldn't wait to evaluate if Brandon Locke was really serious about his investment. As he continued to scan the city, footsteps heading towards the office became audible. Thud, thud. Knock, knock. Come in. At his instructions, the door slowly opened, revealing the figure of his assistant, Aiden. Behind him was a boy with pale white hair that reached his neck and ice-blue eyes, adorned with a formal black suit. That should be him, Charles thought inwardly. The first one to speak was Aiden. Good evening, boss. Let me introduce you to Mr. Brandon Locke. Brandon then returned the gesture. Good evening, sir. Yes, good evening, Mr. Locke. It's so good to finally meet you. Charles had to look as confident as he could, trying to test if Brandon would be intimidated. And to this surprise, the boy stood tall. He kept his posture straight, and there were no signs of fidgeting. He looked as confident as Charles was. Just the sheer effort of the boy was already enough to garner Charles's respect. He had to know more about Brandon Locke. After gesturing for Brandon to take a seat, Charles began to interrogate him. Why our company? The two shook hands with confident smiles on their faces. A partnership between them had been officially established. Not once did Brandon ever flinch, nor was his voice shaky. After all, he'd rehearsed his lines prior to the meeting. It was his first business approach. He couldn't mess it up. Once the meeting was over, Brandon checked for the time, only to find out that 3 hours had already passed. Glancing in front of Charles, who was seated in front of him, Charles spoke up. We look forward to working with you, Mr. Locke. Welcome to Dayas Company. And I look forward to the future prospects of the company, Mr. Dayas. With that, the meeting was officially over. Aiden was then instructed to escort Brandon to the exit. Brandon gave Charles a nod, and just as he was about to leave, something peculiar popped up. It was a system notification. Brandon paused just by the doorframe as he checked his system. System notifications. 1. Quests available. 1. Quests. Survive for 15 minutes. Rewards. Stat points. +5. EXP. +100. System coins. +100. Penalty. Due to the sheer difficulty, no penalty shall be enacted upon the user. Survive? What is this, Maya? TSSSS. Thud dash. Brandon had no time to finish his thoughts as Aiden, who stood beside him, suddenly collapsed. The windows shattered, dispersing glass shards all over the office. When Brandon turned to look at Aiden, there was an unfamiliar red stain that painted the floor. Is that blood? He then realized what had just happened. Aiden was dead. Charles, who was still at his desk, got down immediately, hiding under his table. Get down, Mr. Locke. It's a sniper. What? The reality still hadn't dawned upon Brandon. He was ignorant. Suddenly, an earth barrier materialized, blocking the shattered window. As soon as it was completed, Charles got up and tried to head towards where Brandon was standing. However, boom, the plasma bullet was able to destroy the barrier, etching a hole onto it. Spurt. As Charles was only a few distance away, trying to go to Brandon, another plasma bullet pierced through his calf, making him tumble down. Thud. Ag. Finally, Brandon understood what was going on as he tried to help Charles get up. Mr. Dayas. Charles motioned his hand for Brandon to stop. Don't move, Mr. Locke. The hitman must have a skill that allows him to detect any movement, regardless if it was visible or not. Brandon had the same thought as he stopped moving. Despite the earth wall covering the entire window from where the shots came from, the trajectory of the bullets were accurate. Charles shifted his gaze towards his calf, which was bleeding profusely, and added, since the bullet was strong enough to destroy the earth barrier, the bullets were most likely made out of mana. Whoever the assassin is, they've come prepared, Mr. Locke. Charles narrowed his eye as he emphasized his next words. "This is not something a student can handle. I'm sorry for getting you caught up in all this." Charles's voice was shaky, and Brandon could see his complexions start to pale. The bullet had damaged a pressure point in his calf as it continued to bleed rapidly. But Brandon didn't have any healing skills to aid him. Creak. It was then when the door opened, revealing an unfamiliar figure with brown hair and blue eyes. At the sudden appearance of whom most likely the assassin was, Charles screamed, "Who sent you? And why did you come for our company?" It seemed like Charles was only trying to put up a tough act, since he was laying helplessly on the floor, unable to move. But Brandon could see the fear in his eyes. The man then held up his hand with a mocking smile on his face, forming his fingers like a gun, as he said, "Don't take it personal. If you got any complaints, you can ask my employer." "What are you talking about?" Charles inquired. I think it was something about a company on the brink of collapse, suddenly entering the top ranks of the stock market." At the mention of an employer, Brandon realized who the man was, or rather, the group the man belonged to. The Primordials, a contract company from the underworld, and one of the main antagonists in the earlier chapters of the novel. There were no other groups to fill the criteria, as far as Brandon knew. There were a total of 12 seats in the Primordials, and each seat belonged to the top members. Each member was ranked accordingly, 1 being the strongest and 12 being the weakest. But weak was an understatement. Even the 12th seat alone could make up for an entire army. But most likely, the man that appeared before Brandon was only a subordinate of a seated member. This is because the seated members did not personally take jobs, unless they had to. And since this was just a hitman job, there was no need for a seated member to make an appearance. Brandon continued to peer in the conversation. But the Primordials had never targeted Deus Company in the novel, so why? What changed? It was then when Brandon realized it was because of him. It was most likely because a rival company feared the sudden rise of Deus Company. After all, Deus Company was steadily rising in the novel. It wasn't seen as a threat in the early stages. Or there could be a traitor. It wasn't a far-fetched theory. After all, the hitman knew which building to use and scout out the office. From the trajectory of where the bullet came from, to the fact that the hitman knew which exact room to enter. But it was all speculation in the end. Regardless, Brandon's decision to invest on the company this early on was most likely the catalyst for these events. Because of me, innocent people are going to die. No, he had to do something about this. With elemental manipulation, Brandon conjured an ice barrier between the hitman and Charles, who looked like he was about to faint from the blood loss. Oh, the hitman raised his brow. Faced in a life or death situation, there was no need to hide it. Brandon channeled lightning, circulating it in his arms. Crackle. Spark. The hitman had an amused expression in his face as he said, "Deviant? How interesting." Bang, bang, dash. Plasma bullets were fired off in Brandon's direction. Crackle, swoosh, dash. With lightning coursing in his legs, Brandon darted from his position, leaving trails of sparks. But to his surprise, the bullet changed trajectory, following him. Realizing this, Brandon conjured an ice shell to block it. However, crack, pshhh dash. The ice shattered instantly, as the ice shards grazed Brandon's cheek. Fuck. Brandon had little to no experience in fighting. His only knowledge stems from the manhwas and novels he'd read. He needed to bridge the gap in experience somehow. Glancing back to his system, he had 8 minutes left until Hill reaps the rewards. If I can just stall for Tim. Bang dash. Brandon didn't even have time to finish his thoughts, as the hitman once again fired off his gun. He quickly conjured up another ice shell, going on the defensive. Bang! Bang, pshhhh dash. Each bullet would shatter the ice instantly, but it was fine. Since the bullets were most likely of the lightning affinity, it would dissipate once it made impact. As long as it doesn't hit me. All he had to do was to keep this up until the quest ends. The hitman was peeved about the whole ordeal. He realized it was going nowhere, and there was no point in humoring the boy. He wasn't the target. The hitman then pointed his gun towards Charles, who was laying behind an ice shell. No! The boy's scream echoed. Swoosh! Suddenly, like a bolt of charge, the hitman was sent hurling away. Thud dash! Boom dash! He crashed onto the wall as his body jerked up, feeling the volt of electricity in his body. Fuck, this is why I hate dealing with deviants. You'll never know which magic they'll use. In truth, this wasn't his first time fighting a deviant. Deviants weren't extraordinarily rare, but he still didn't expect to encounter one on this job. He was told by his employer that the target didn't have any bodyguards. Due to this, he thoroughly prepared to execute the plan flawlessly. I shouldn't have taken this job. He was a member of the Primordials, but only a subordinate of the 12th seat, a cannon fodder. He wasn't strong enough to actually be tasked in official contracted missions, which is why he decided to take requests outside of the organization. Hence, leading to this job, a request from a certain employee of the exact same company he was working on. Because his plan of taking over the company went in shambles, he put up a request on the underground world to kill his CEO. The hitman got up, and his gaze landed on the black-haired man laying down on the floor with fake blood on the back of his head. TSK, is that bastard not going to help me? The plan he was given was to first shoot a fake bullet on the employer, then make an appearance and kill the boy and the CEO. The reason for this was simple. His employer, though he was a mage, wasn't strong enough to actually fight his boss. Plus, evidence of killing his boss would lead back to him. He had to cover his tracks, which is why he hired the hitman. The plan was supposed to go smoothly, but what they didn't take into account was the white-haired boy being a deviant. The hitman once again pointed the finger gun at the boy. Bang dash! But the boy suddenly disappeared. The hitman could trace sparks of lightning darting around the room. It seemed like the boy finally figured out how to use his lightning. From what he knew, lightning was one of the harder affinities to control. This is because lightning was a concentration of energy. If you didn't have enough control, then the lightning would just dissipate. Still, the gap in experience was worlds apart. Countering lightning magic was easy. After all, the hitman had the lightning affinity as well. The bullets he used were a product of electroplasma. He felt the boy getting closer, as his fist that was clad in lightning seemed like it was about to connect. TSZ. Phew. The two were sent hurling away, as the hitman had redirected the lightning back to the boy. Brandon could feel the volt of electricity coursing through him. He'd never felt anything like this before, and it seemed like his nerves were out of commission. He couldn't get up. Am I going to die here? Regret suddenly washed over him. I shouldn't have gotten way in over my head. Just because he knew the future didn't guarantee that he would actually survive. After all, just 2 days ago, he was just a normal boy attending high school. It was all fun and games for him at first, but this was reality. Path to Ascension was filled with danger, as people with ill intentions walked every corner. The realization of the world he was brought into had finally sinked in. I thought I was invincible. Having power didn't equate to actually knowing how to utilize it. Someone, save me, please. But there was no one. Charles Deus had passed out from the blood loss, and Aiden was dead. I'm scared. He was all alone, and just as his fears were realized, the hitman got up and pointed his finger gun at Brandon. It's over. But just as he was about to give up, quest completed. Rewards obtained. Stat points, +5. System coins, +100. EXP, +100. You have leveled up. Skill Weaver capacity has increased. You have unlocked the Fire Affinity. Are you sure? Yes. Initializing Skill Weaver. Downloading data. ETA 1 minute. You weren't bad, kid. Maybe if you had more experience, you would have had a fighting chance. The hitman's index finger gradually lit up a yellow glow. Bang dash. The hitman only had to shoot the plasma bullet. What? But for some reason, the bullet didn't fire off. It instantly dissipated. Surely there was a mistake? But this was the first time it had ever happened in his career. He had honed and perfected this technique to its full potential. Despite being a low-ranked member of the Primordials, he was a feared, ruthless killer in his own team, giving him the nickname Ghost. He had not failed a single contract ever since he joined the organization. His skills were among the best of the best in his team. So why? He felt like he was about to lose. Suddenly, the boy got up. His fearful expression from earlier had already vanished, replaced with one of indifference. Step. Ghost took a step back. Once again, he contoured another finger gun, aiming it at the boy. PSHHH. Only for the plasma bullet dissipated once again. He realized this was no mistake. This is the boy's doing. Suddenly, blue sparks protruded from the boy. Lightning seemed to be coursing through his veins. And in an instant, he had disappeared. Swoosh dash. But of course, due to Ghost ability, his eyes could track the boy's movement. Once again, the boy's fist was about to reach him. Trying to redirect the lightning again, Ghost surged up a volt of electricity. However, he could not feel any volt at all. As soon as he felt a minuscule amount of electricity, it suddenly disappeared, as if it was never there in the first place. Boom! The boy's fist struck Ghost, sending him hurling away. Fuck, what's going on? How is he doing that? Crack! As he crashed onto the wall, he was given no time to recuperate as crystals of ice lunged from the ground, heading towards him. Spur dash. With his reflexes, he managed to narrowly dodge the crystals, only grazing his leg. But as soon as he dodged, a torrent of flames headed his way. What the fuck? A deviant with 3 affinities? That makes no sense. Of course, there were other deviants who were blessed with 2 or more affinities. But in all his years of being a contracted killer, not once had he ever encountered one. The only known deviants with more than 2 affinities were the top 10 mages in the world. And for what he heard, the first seat of the primordials was deviant as well. Their strength was comparable to God's. Who is this boy? And why hasn't anyone heard of him yet? As he dodged the flames, before he knew it, the boy had already managed to get behind him. Thwack! TSSSZZZ dash. At impact, Ghost was sent crashing towards the window as volts of lightning trailed from him. Crash! The sound of glass shattering reverberated the room as shards of glass were scattered all over. 8 dash. As Ghost was about to be sent falling to his doom, the boy grabbed the scruff of his collar. Before Ghost could even react to what happened, the boy coldly locked eyes with him. Which seat do you work for? Huh. For some reason, the boy knew he was working for someone. And at the mention of seat, the boy seemed to know more than he let out. How does he know about the primordials? Despite being a large organization, the primordials was not well known to the public. They were good at erasing their traces, and whenever a member was a risk to the organization, they would be silenced. Despite being at the mercy of the boy, he feared the organization more than him. Of course, he didn't want to die, but at this moment, he'd rather be killed off by the boy than facing the wrath of the primordials. Ghost didn't answer him, giving the boy a smirk. Sorry, it seems I haven't introduced myself to you. With a look of indifference, the boy's eyes narrowed, as if he was staring directly in Ghost's soul. Standing before you is the first seat of the primordial. What? Ghost's eyes shot wide open, as his mouth contoured to a silent O shape. Now it all made sense. His power, his confidence. But the first seat had never shown up for any meetings. He was a mysterious figure, and the only one who had contact with him was the second seat. Ghost didn't know the names of any other seated member. Regular subordinates weren't allowed that kind of information. They only knew the name of the seat they devoted themselves to. In Ghost's case, it was the 12th seat. He couldn't believe the boy's claims so easily. Thus, he had to confirm it. If you're who you say you are, then what's the name of the 12th seat? I see. So you work for Pulcinella. Once again, Ghost was astonished, his jaw slacked open in disbelief. Now, that settles it. Ghost could only believe in the boy. There was no other answer. He really is the first seat. Only the other seated members knew the names of each other. How would you like to secretly work for me? Was this an opportunity? Were the days of being Pulcinella's henchman finally over? As you know, I operate secretly, the first seat stated. He was right. Only the first seat didn't have his own team. This was definitely an opportunity for Ghost to finally climb the ranks of the organization. Directly operating under the first seat was an offer he couldn't miss. With no hesitation, Ghost gave his response. I accept. If you wish it, I will abandon the 12th seat. No, continue with your operations. But remember, you secretly work for me now, so my orders are absolute. Ghost felt a chill down his spine. The immense pressure that the first seat exuded bore down on him. He truly was befitting of his title as the strongest primordial. But despite that, Ghost could tell that the first seat seemed to be weaker than the 12th seat. He must be hiding his strength. Just like his fight with Ghost, he only revealed his strength at the last second. It made sense since he was a mysterious man. Of course he would hide his power in public. There was no reason to doubt him. It was the only explanation. Yes, sir. What should I call you? My real name is Leon, sir. But my code name is Ghost. I'll call you Alpha, and you can call me him. He seemed to ponder before he gave his response. From now on, call me Moriarty. Tap, tap, tap. Tapping on his desk, Charles locked eyes with Brandon and spoke up. So, everything is all settled? Yes. You may resume operations tomorrow. Right. And you're saying this man will be my assistant from now on? Charles's gaze shifted to another man with red hair who stood beside Brandon. It was none other than Ghost, now Alpha. That's right. Trust me, Mr. Deus. He will no longer harm you or the company. Okay, since you saved my life, it's the least I could do for you. Thank you, Mr. Deus. At the end of it all, Brandon gave a healing potion, which was given by Alpha, to Charles. Brandon then gave Charles some time to recover, while informing him about what Aiden's betrayal. Charles couldn't believe it at first. After all, Aiden had been working for him for 2 years. Of course, Aiden denied all accusations. But the fact that he was alive, after being presumed dead, spoke enough. When they checked the transactions that Aiden made, they discovered that a substantial amount of the company's assets were transferred to an unknown account. Thus, Aiden was given up to the police. How did something like this manage to slip under Charles's watch? Brandon began to doubt if this man really knew what he was doing. But then again, if the events in the novel were right, then there was no need to worry. Brandon then exchanged contacts with Charles and Alpha. Alpha had to use a burner phone for the process. He was still a full-fledged member of the Primordials, so Brandon couldn't make any compromises. He was already pretending to be the first seat of the Primordials. If they were to find out, then things would get messy. And Brandon wasn't strong enough to face the organization yet. He was now walking on a tightrope. But if he played his cards right, then the benefits outweigh the costs. He now had an underling/informant serving under him. Alpha. For the first time in his life, Brandon finally felt like he had power. Surely, in this world, he can become someone special. Plus, he had the system aiding him. Brandon then silently muttered to himself. System. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 2. EXP, 150/300. Class, Anomaly. Right angle, you are an entity that does not belong to this world. An anomaly. Passive. Right angle skill weaver. Right angle, create any skill possible within the user's capabilities. Right angle, increase your capacity by +1 per level. Right angle, total skills, 2 of 2. Skill tab. Stats. Stat points available, 0. Right angle STR, F. Right angle MP, F+. Right angle def, F. Right angle AGI, F. Right angle int, F+. Right angle charm, F. System shop. System coins, 100. Quests available, 0. As he now possessed 2 skills, a skill tab had popped up to better organize his skills. Skill tab. Right angle, elemental manipulation. Right angle ice. Right angle lightning. Right angle fire. Mana disruption. Right angle disrupts mana, causing it to never take shape and scatter. Can only target one specific location. During the fight with Alpha, Brandon had to think of a skill that could help him win. He decided to come up with a way to counter Alpha. No, to counter all the mages in the world. Mana disruption. It was truly a groundbreaking skill. Of course, if he could, he would have wanted to fully cancel mana, completely rendering his enemy helpless. But for some reason, the system made it so that he could only disrupt the mana on one specific location. But still, with this skill, Brandon knew he could rise to the top of the world. Scratch following the storyline. He had already diverted from the plot, from combat class to investing in the company, and Alpha's appearance was proof of his actions. Of course, The knowledge of the future was still useful. But the conclusions? I can change it, all the major deaths in the novel, everything. But it meant Raven wouldn't get his development. If only Brandon was the protagonist, then things would become significantly easier. But he wasn't, so he decided to do the little things he could. His appearance was already a change in the story itself, so a little bit of change wouldn't hurt. As long as it doesn't conflict with Raven's journey, then it might be fine, is what he thought. His gaze then landed on Charles, who continued to speak. I look forward to our business partnership, Mr. Locke and Alpha. It seemed like Charles was still skeptical. But regardless, Brandon nodded at his words. All's well ends well. Sometime around 11 p.m., Brandon returned to the apartment, only to find Belle studying in the kitchen. Ho, where were you? Belle abruptly cut him off, then turned to skin Brandon's attire, or what was left of it. What happened to you? Brandon's once elegant black suit was now tattered and ripped, with tears and holes all over it. His hair was disheveled, and his face was filled with dust. It was a sorry sight, but Brandon just shrugged it off like it was nothing. I just tripped. That's what they all say. Are you getting bullied, Brandon? Brandon was taken aback. He didn't expect his new sister to actually be worried about him. Of course, his torn suit and haggard look was the result of his fight with Alpha. With a worried look, Belle continued. If someone's messing with you, just tell me, okay? Belle spoke as if she had some influence in the school, or maybe she was actually strong. Brandon had to find out. If someone was, then what are you going to do about it? Belle furrowed her brow and sternly stated, exercise my authority as the student council president. Brandon's eyes shot wide open as his mouth was left agape. It seemed like Belle was serious. He didn't expect Belle to be someone of significant importance in the academy. This is interesting. From what he knew, the student council president had never made an appearance in the novel. Could this have been because of my appearance in the story? The mystery of who Brandon Locke was had skyrocketed his curiosity. But for now, Brandon was too exhausted to think about it. Brandon flashed his sister a smile and said, that's right. But don't worry, it's nothing like that. There were just some issues during my part-time job. Brandon had already expected Belle to be shocked as her eyes widened. You found a job? Well, sort of. You could just ask our parents for money, right? Like the spoiled, rich daughter she was. It occurred to Brandon that his new family was wealthy. He realized it when he observed Belle's lifestyle. It was the same way the rich girls from his previous world would act like. I know, but I'd like to do something with my own capabilities. I see, good for you. Be sure to treat me to something nice next time. Okay? Sure. He stuttered. Brandon then headed to his bedroom and immediately collapsed on his bed. It was an exhausting day for him. From attending lectures, finding a proper suit, which was now destroyed, rehearsing his lines for the business meeting, and finally, fighting Ghost. Alpha. He had never been so busy in all his life. But it's nice to be this productive. He was finally turning his life around. From a teenage boy with no aspirations to becoming Brandon Locke. He truly felt blessed at this second chance given to him. Asterisk. Brandon was in his seat as he glanced around the other students focusing on their written test. Apparently, today was the day for the final evaluation of the rankings in their class, in which the final criteria would be the written test. Since Brandon skipped out on his final class yesterday due to preparing for his business meeting with Charles, he wasn't informed. Of course, he didn't have Raven's number, so Raven didn't inform him in advance. Plus, they were all arranged in alphabetical order, meaning Brandon didn't know the person seated next to him. He couldn't ask him for answers. Not like they'd even let me copy. Furthermore, Brandon didn't grow up in this world, so he knew next to nothing about what was in the test. In short, he was cooked. But he couldn't give up just yet. If I just use the knowledge I have about the novel, then I should get a good grade, is what he thought. Okay, class. The automated checker has already graded your test. You can check the Astria Academy app for your results. Vanessa roamed around the podium as she informed them. Brandon wasn't feeling confident at all, but it shouldn't be too bad. He then turned to check the Astria Academy app, trying to find his student ID. Brandon Locke. Student ID. 148,269. Score. 24 out of 200. Fuck. It was bad. With this, he officially cemented himself as the lowest-ranked student in class. Vanessa then requested the student's attention as she held a white device in her hand. Congratulations, everyone. You have all finished the initial evaluation for the school year. Welcome to Astria Academy. For freshmen, they had to take a 3-day evaluation test at the start of the school year, ranging from combat class, physical training, theory class, and history. In short, the mandatory classes. Minor subjects didn't count. Vanessa then continued. I will now show you the official rankings of all the first-year students. Suddenly, a rectangular hologram materialized out of thin air. On it, displayed the student's profile, such as their face, name, age, and ranking. This was also uploaded in the app, so you can check it there as well. Since the only rankings displayed on the hologram were the top 10 students, they were given the option to check the app. And of course, Brandon wasn't in the top 10. I did well in combat class, so my ranking shouldn't be too bad, right? Once again, Brandon turned to check the app. His first initiative was to check for the rankings of the important characters, particularly the main cast. If the events in the novel align, then the main cast should be within the top 5. Raven Blackheart, 1/2012. Reinhard Van, 2/2012. Claire Victoria, 3/2012. Amy Ashfield, 4/2012. Rachel Asami, 5/2012. Brandon breathed out a sigh of relief. Good. It seems like nothing's changed in that department. This was good. It meant that, as long as Brandon doesn't meddle too much, then the plot line should flow smoothly. Brandon continued to scroll down, trying to find his name. He'd already passed the 1,000th ranking, and he still didn't find his name. Damn. He started to panic. As he continued to scroll, he finally found his name. Brandon Locke, 1,890/2012. That's bad. It really was. In all his life, he was always an average student. But this is way below mediocre. He was grade conscious as well. As the other students continued to scan their phones, Vanessa once again spoke up. Don't be disheartened if you got a low ranking. You can always climb the ranks if you do your best. When Vanessa mentioned low ranking, it felt as if she turned her gaze to Brandon's direction. She couldn't have been looking at me, right? Brandon felt guilty for not meeting Vanessa's expectations. From his initial debut in the academy to his astonishing performance in combat class, Vanessa must have thought he was going to be an outstanding student, but in the end he was average at best. No, he was way below average. Haha, it's fine. I've got the whole school year to climb my way in the rankings. It was then when a male student stood up with a frown in his face. This must be a mistake, right? How is Raven Blackheart the top one when he's a duelist? Then another student chimed in. Yeah, I understand Reinhard Van's ranking, but how did Raven Blackheart even rank higher than him? From what they knew, Reinhard was a prodigious mage of the famous Van family, while Raven was an unknown student with no background or status to his name. Plus, he was a duelist. It was enough for the students to complain. And since Raven was placed in a class with no other duelists, he had no one to defend him. At least, that was what the other students should have been thinking. Brandon had a smirk on his face as he thought to himself. Right, this happened in the novel as well. Then if I'm right. Another student stood up with deep red hair and ink black eyes. It was none other than Reinhard Van. Right on cue. Well, thanks for whatever that was. But I beg to differ about your assessment of Raven. Reinhard quickly gathered everyone's attention and continued. He's most definitely deserving of first place. Instead of worrying about someone else, worry about your own rankings first. Reinhard narrowed his eyes as his tone became serious. If you're so willing to deny his effort, then why don't you try fighting him for his ranking? He then turned towards Vanessa, who was still standing in the podium listening to the whole thing. That's allowed in this academy, right, miss? Yes, thank you for bringing that up. As for what Reinhard said, an easy way to climb the ranks is to directly challenge a student who's willing to wager their ranking. From a distance, Brandon could see Raven's mouth agape. Most likely, he must have not expected to be put on the spot by Reinhard. Brandon let out a soft chuckle. This scene is even crazier in real life than in the novel. The other students then settled down. Some had anguished looks, while some didn't really care. And surprisingly, Raven just let the entire thing unfold. But Brandon felt bad for not standing up for him, knowing he was Raven's only friend. There was nothing Brandon could do. He had no authority in the classroom, and his ranking couldn't back him up either. His words held no sway over the students. Plus, this would cement the beginning of Raven and Reinhard's friendship. They were dismissed for the rest of the day, as the semester officially kicks off tomorrow. Vanessa then announced a party to be held at 7 p.m. for freshmen to get acquainted with their fellow peers. After the whole ordeal, Raven immediately got up and left the room. He must have not wanted to indulge with other students, since things seemed to be tense at the moment. Reinhard immediately caught up and followed him, and so did Brandon. Raven gave his thanks to Reinhard for sticking up for him. Of course, he didn't blame Brandon for staying silent the whole time. If it were Raven, he would have done the same, so what Reinhard did was absurd to him. Brandon roamed around the halls, walking side by side with Raven and Reinhard. The one to break the silence first was Reinhard. Anyway, about the party. Do you guys have a suit to wear? Nope, Brandon and Raven said in unison. Well, lucky for you two. I know just a place where we could get one for cheap. Brandon's ears perked up and asked, Really? Yup, let me call my acquaintance first. At the mention of an acquaintance, Brandon had an idea of who Reinhard was about to call. From behind them, the trio heard a voice. Hey, Reinhard. When his name was mentioned, Reinhard gave a smile and turned around to trace the source of the voice. Never mind. Seems like she's here. The two followed suit and scanned her appearance. She had short lavender hair, purple eyes, adorning a white long sleeve under a purple jacket. Despite her tomboyish looks, her facial features were quite feminine. Yup, I knew it. Reinhard then motioned towards the girl, wrapping his arms around her shoulder, and said, Guys, I'd like to introduce you to my childhood friend, Claire Victoria. Oh, so you're Raven Blackheart. I've heard about what happened in your class. Must have sucked. Claire tried to console Raven in her own way. Why, yeah, but I'm used to it by now. Smack dash. Reinhard slapped Raven in the back as he advised him. Grow some backbone, man. You shouldn't let people walk all over you like that. At Reinhard's words, Brandon twitched slightly, recalling past memories of being walked all over by people. Crack. With a devious smile on her face, Claire cracked her knuckles and said, Yeah? Why don't we teach those guys a lesson? Absolutely not. Do you want to get expelled? Reinhard shot her down instantly. Whatever. Claire rolled her eyes as she crossed her arms. Reinhard then approached Brandon, placing his arm on his shoulder. And this guy over here is Brandon Locke. Since Reinhard was taller than the three, he could easily place his arm on their shoulders. He was really touchy with people. With a smile on his face, Brandon gave his greetings. Hello, Miss Claire. Claire's fine. Anyway, I remember you back in combat class. You were pretty good. But why are people saying you fell off or something? Ahaha. Brandon scratched the back of his head, giving Claire an awkward laugh. He knew the reason why, but he didn't know people were talking behind his back about it. Even in this world, people still gossip about everything. Reinhard seemed to notice the mood had become sour as he reprimanded Claire. You still haven't changed that bad habit of yours. Sorry about this, guys. No, it's really fine. But what did you call Claire for? Of course, Brandon already knew what Claire was here for. After all, right, this girl over here, who can't seem to think before speaking, is the heir to Victoria's supermall. Reinhard said while patting Claire's head. Claire seemed like she wanted to say something about it, but she kept her mouth shut. Whoa, Brandon and Raven said in unison. But for Brandon's case, he was merely pretending to be amazed. Reinhard cupped his hand around his ear, tilting his head slightly near Claire. Oh, what's that? You said you'll give us a discount because you felt bad? His tone sounded sarcastic. Claire seemed reluctant, pondering for a moment. Fine. Haha. I knew we could count on you. Reinhard once again walked towards where Raven and Brandon were standing, placing his arm on both their shoulders. Well, gentlemen, you've heard the lady. It's a 100% discount, basically free. Hey, Claire retorted. The two boys could only stay silent the whole time, unsure of what to make out of the situation. Reinhard and Claire seemed to have a relationship like fire and ice. Arriving at the mall, if one could describe the sheer space that it covered, even huge would be an understatement. It was enormous. Stalls and rented spaces were lined all over, as a grand fountain was situated at the center. People wandered about. Children, adults, and seniors took their time shopping and exploring. The air was alive with the chatter of conversation and murmurs being audible. Vendors called out to each person passing by, their voices mixing with the crowd. Brandon and Raven stood there in awe, while Reinhard and Claire motioned ahead of them. Claire turned around to face the two. "What are you two just standing still for? Let's go." At her instructions, the two immediately followed suit. "Yes, ma'am." The four hopped on a white circular device. As soon as they did, there was a robotic voice that spoke. "Which floor would you like to go to?" "Floor 28. Boom." As soon as Claire gave the instructions, the circular device lit up green, and they were instantly teleported to the 28th floor. Damn! Brandon was taken aback. At first he thought it was just a fancy elevator, but turns out it was so much more different. The technological advancement of this world had never failed to meet his astonishment. Noticing this, Raven tilted his head. "You've never used a shift porter before?" "And no. That's weird. Isn't your family rich? I thought you'd have a shift porter in the lock company building." Claire chimed in, leaning close to Brandon. Haha, I must have forgotten. My family's been calling me forgetful lately." Okay." At the mention of lock company, Brandon's interest instantly skyrocketed. I really need to look into Brandon Locke's identity. At this moment, he could fully admit that Brandon Locke was an interesting character. So why didn't he ever make an appearance in the novel? He had the system, something that the main protagonist had. He was also rich, and his looks are something worth remembering. The way Brandon Locke was designed seemed like he wasn't just an ordinary extra. From the pale white hair that reached his neck to the ice blue eyes. Plus, his face was perfectly symmetrical. Even a narcissist would agree to that. There was no doubt in Brandon's mind that this seemingly extra character he'd transmigrated as had to have an important role in the story. But he then remembered that he had stockpiled 400 chapters behind, only reading up until the 3,891th chapter. But isn't that too far in the story to introduce a new character? It was, and the fact that Brandon Locke had a system made Brandon even more suspicious. There has to be something more about Brandon Locke. He truly wished he could search the character in the Path to Ascension wiki page. I'll find out eventually. After all, he was now playing the character. Stepping out of the shift porter, Brandon, Raven, and Reinhard followed Claire closely. She had led them to a store with mannequins wearing suits and dresses being displayed on the front glass. The four of them beckoned inside. As they made their way inside, an employee was already ready to greet them. "Good evening, Miss Victoria, and these must be your friends." "Good evening, yes, that's right. Could you help us get something tailored to wear?" "Tailored, huh?" "A rich girl through and through. She's just like Belle." Of course, Brandon couldn't say it out loud. "Yes, gladly. But for a moment, we're still helping another customer get something tailored." "That's fine. Take your time." The four sat down on a circular couch. While they waited, the employees unexpectedly offered them refreshments. What kind of store is this? Back in Brandon's world, clothing stores wouldn't usually have refreshments. The customs of this world were truly a mystery to him. After waiting for a while, it seemed like the other customers had finished getting tailored. A door situated in the corner opened, revealing two women. One of them had pitch black hair, while the other women had bright blonde hair. When their gaze landed on the four who sat on the couch, their eyes peered wide open. And so was Claire's. Amy and Rachel? Fancy meeting you here. What a coincidence, Claire. Is that Reinhard with you? Amy approached the four, scanning the three people she was with, while Rachel also followed suit. Reinhard then greeted Amy and Rachel. "Yep, good to see you again, Amy, Rachel." Seemed like rich people knew each other. Claire added, "Yeah, we're getting something tailored for the party. You too, right?" Amy then pointed at Rachel and responded, "Yup, you guys must have waited long. Sorry about that." Rachel here took too long deciding on what design she wanted. Sorry. Rachel bowed apologetically. No, it's okay. Anyway, let me introduce you guys to these two over here. Claire presented with open hands towards Brandon and Raven, as if she was giving a report. This gloomy fellow over here is Raven Blackheart, and this guy with the long hair is... Before Claire could finish, Rachel cut her off. Nice to see you again, Brandon. Yeah, you too, Rachel. The other four tilted their heads, giving a confused look. Ah, you two know each other? Claire asked. Yeah, we're classmates. Oh, that's right. I forgot you, Reinhard. And Raven was in the same class as Rachel. One of the employees then approached the group, gesturing towards the door. Miss Claire, the room is now open. You may proceed to get tailored right away. After getting tailored, the six decided to explore the mall together. They stopped by different stores, trying on new clothes, though it was mostly the girls that did. While in some stores, they decided to window shop. Reinhard held all the bags that contained the new clothes that the girls bought. He then proceeded to stop walking and took a good look at the two boys who were carrying nothing in front of him. Hey, you two, aren't you going to help me? Nope, Raven answered, while Brandon didn't even spare Reinhard a single glance. Heartless bastards. After roaming for a while, the group took a breather and stopped by a coffee shop. Seated at a table for six, they each ordered their own coffee. Brandon was astonished once again with the technological advancement of the world. Each table had a small circular device that, once you channel your mana onto it, a holographic menu would pop up showing all the things that were available for order. After it was prepared, your order would appear through a small shift porter that was placed in the middle of the table. When it was Raven's time to order, except for Brandon, the others let out a shocked expression. They initially thought Raven was a rare case of someone that didn't have mana, but to their surprise, he actually did. It wasn't a secret for Raven or anything, but he couldn't explain to them why he couldn't utilize his mana the way mages could. Of course, Brandon already knew this. It was because of his system. The system kind of held back his potential to be a mage. But in return, his individual growth was progressive, just like a game. Meaning, he had no limitations, just like Brandon. The whole time everyone shopped together, Brandon fell out of place. After all, he was the lowest ranked within the group. Plus, I don't belong here. They were the main cast, and he was just an extra. No, he wasn't even an extra, knowing he was a transmigrator who took over Brandon Locke's body. But it feels nice to actually interact with the characters I've read about for so long. These were his genuine feelings. There were times when he'd miss his old world and his mother, but moments like these made him feel welcomed in the new world he was brought into. Still, I shouldn't get too attached to them. The plotline was already changing, I shouldn't meddle with it more. But he knew there was no getting out of it, just his appearance in the story had already altered some events of the storyline. This event happened in the novel, but Brandon Locke wasn't supposed to be here. Taking a sip on his coffee, Reinhard turned to look at Raven and asked, So, Mr. Ranked One, what do you plan on doing? What are you talking about? About our classmates. Amy decided to chime in as well. What about your classmates? Since Amy wasn't in their class, she didn't know anything. Claire wasn't in their class as well since she and Amy were classmates. But she's one of those girls who likes to gossip. It was then when Reinhard told Amy about what had happened during the announcement of the first-year rankings. From the opposition of the other students to Reinhard sticking up for Raven. He spared no details, telling everyone how he felt and how unfair everything was. Amy furrowed her brow, furious about the whole thing. She then turned toward Brandon. Isn't your sister the student council president? Why don't you ask her to do something about it? As if the realization dawned upon him, Reinhard spoke up. Ah, no one of the last names were the same. Now that I took a good look, you and President Bell do look alike. Raven was shocked as well, but he didn't question Brandon. While Rachel, who was reading a book while drinking her coffee, didn't really care about the conversation. Right, I'll ask her if she could do something about it. Raven shook his head and responded to Brandon. You don't have to involve your sister. It's fine. I can handle it myself. No, we're friends, so let me help you out. Raven seemed reluctant to accept the gesture, but eventually agreed. If you say so, Since Raven grew up alone in the rural area of the city, he wasn't used to others giving him a helping hand. Brandon knew this, which is why he decided to give him a push. He wasn't alone anymore. He now had friends he could rely on. Amy clasped her hands together. Well, now that's all settled, let's talk about the electives we're all planning on taking. I think we should all go together. Electives were courses that a student can take part of to gain experience and polish their skills. Unlike other academies, Astria Academy takes their electives seriously, meaning electives were mandatory for each student. It also has to be noted that failing an elective would result in expulsion, which is why they had to choose wisely. But of course, there were some students who would take an easy elective to avoid expulsion. But in doing so, they would hinder their growth and potential. And since Astria Academy was an incredibly competitive school, improving was the only way to survive. It was then when Rachel decided to put her book down and joined in on the conversation. I'm planning on taking magical music and harmony. Are you sure? I know you love playing the piano, but that wouldn't benefit you at all. I know, but we're allowed to choose 3 electives. I'll join in whatever you guys decide to take. Reinhard placed his hand on his chin and said, She's right. Let's all join whatever electives we like. And for the other 2 slots, we can join that one together. Amy gave a response. Okay, you have a point. For my first elective, I'll probably join potion crafting. As if her curiosity was piqued, Claire spoke up. Interesting. Care to explain why? Since my family is the leading manufacturer of potions, it would be best if I polish my skills while I'm in the academy. Okay, fair. You are the only heir after all. Exactly. It seemed like Amy had a sorrowful look as she spoke. But only Brandon was the one to notice. After all, it was then Claire's turn to speak. For me, I think I plan on joining a duelist elective. Clink. Amy and Raven's eyes shot wide open. Even Rachel wasn't an exception as she dropped her fork. She was eating a blueberry cheesecake. They seemed taken aback that Claire wanted to pick up the sword while being a full-fledged mage. Mages who used the sword weren't rare. But most of the duelist faction could only use magic to a slight degree, which was the main reason why they were often looked down upon. But in Raven's case, he showed no signs of using any magic prior to this point. Instead of Claire, it was Reinhard who informed them, while laughing. Haha, I can see the shocked looks on your faces. Claire's actually been learning the sword since we were kids. Amy's gaze shifted from Reinhard to Claire and asked, Is that true? Rachel leaned in, nodding her head repeatedly, wanting to confirm it as well. Yeah, I'm going for a duelist and mage hybrid, Claire solemnly stated. Brandon just took a seat back the whole time. He already knew what electives everyone was going to choose. For Raven, he's going to choose a duelist-related one as well. And for Reinhard, he's going to choose artificing. Truly, a loyal reader. After everyone had decided on their first elective, they all turned to Brandon. And what about you, Mr. Identry Alcariso? I'm just casually zipping my coffee. Which elective are you choosing? It was Amy who asked. The whole time, Brandon was pondering on what elective he should choose. It took a while for him to decide, but weighing the pros and cons, he had already decided. Advanced spell casting. What? The 5 were taken aback. Each one of their mouths were left agape, as their eyes widened in surprise. Their reaction was understandable. Advanced spellcasting was an elective that would only be recommended once you became a 3rd year. The reason for this was because first-year students would have a hard time applying the theories that would be discussed, adding to the fact that first-year students' magic output was subpar in comparison to the 3rd-year students. Putting 2 on 2 together, it wouldn't take a genius to know that a first-year student would absolutely flunk the elective. In short, it was way too risky for Brandon. But would he lose? Nah, I'd win. There were reasons why Brandon opted for advanced spellcasting as his first choice. Since it was an elective that none of the main cast would choose, it would give him a chance to mingle with other extras. With the higher years being more experienced in magic, it was the best opportunity for Brandon to get references for weaving new skills. Scanning their faces, Brandon could see they had a look of doubt. But he couldn't blame them. He was the lowest ranked within the group after all. Amy decided to speak up first. Are you that confident in your skills? Yup. Well, okay. You were the first one to break the magic orb after all. Raven then placed his arm on Brandon's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I believe in you, and if you fail, good luck. It was nice meeting you." Everyone laughed at how casual Raven's tone was. After finishing their discussions, they all proceeded to pick up their appropriate attires from a store. The technological advancement of the world once again astonished Brandon. The process was finished in just under 5 hours. At the end of it all, everyone decided to bid their farewells, each going home separately. They all agreed to go to the party together, Claire volunteering to pick everyone up. While changing, Brandon could hear Belle speak loudly from outside his room. "Brandon, your friends are here to pick you up. Tell them to wait for a minute." In truth, Brandon had already finished changing a few minutes ago. Retrieving his phone from his pocket, Brandon dialed a number with no name saved. Ring, ring, click dash. Alpha. Lord Moriarty, what can I do for you? Lord. It was quite cringe for Brandon, but he decided to go with it anyway. "I need you to do something for me." Arriving at the venue, Brandon and Raven were surprised at the sheer luxury of the place, while the rest seemed like they were already used to it. Chandeliers hang from the ceiling, lighting up the entire place. Chafing dishes were aligned above the tablecloths, readily accessible for guests to serve themselves from, while beverage dispensers were situated opposite from the food. Goblets and luxurious-looking utensils and plates were neatly arranged. The students all wore suits and dresses, mingling with each other. "Also, seems like the party has already started," Brandon boldly stated. Turning towards Brandon with a frown on her face, Claire said, "And whose fault do you think that is?" "I said I was sorry." "Whatever." She turned toward the other three and continued, "Anyway, shall we all get going?" They nodded with smiles on their faces. Approaching the chafing dishes, Brandon immediately filled his plate with as much food as the plate could contain. "I've never had food like this in all my life." It was true. Growing up in the rural area of the city, Brandon wasn't used to the kind of luxury he now had. Rachel scanned Brandon, then to his plate, giving him a puzzled look. "Can you finish all that?" "Doesn't matter, it's free." "Oh, okay." Brandon scanned her plate as well. Compared to his, her plate only had a minuscule amount of food. At least, that's what Brandon thought. "You sure you only want to eat that much? This is actually enough for a normal person." Rachel sarcastically informed him. "If you say so." Brandon continued to fill his plate, stopping by each chafing dish. When he finally reached the last chafing dish, he turned towards Rachel, who seemed to be picky with her food. He took a good look at her appearance. She adorned a luxurious black dress that complemented her dark crimson eyes, as well as highlighting her curves. But Brandon completely dismissed his thoughts, turning his gaze on a certain area. "I'll be going now. Our table is over there, okay?" He pointed towards the table where Reinhard, Claire, and Raven sat in. "Okay, I'll follow you in a bit." Brandon nodded at her words. Approaching the table, the three gave him a look of astonishment. Puzzled by their reactions, Brandon asked, "What?" "Nothing, just surprised by how much you eat." Claire dismissed him. As Brandon sat down, he turned to observe the three. Claire and Reinhard held goblets that contained a yellowish liquid, most likely wine. Raven was busy eating. His plate was filled to the brim with meat. "What a glutton. As if you could talk." Raven instantly shot him down. Brandon then turned towards Reinhard and Claire, who were gracefully sipping from their glasses. "Are you two not going to eat?" "Nope. If I act mature and drink wine fancily, it'll be seen as attractive for the girls over there." The whole time he spoke, Reinhard did not spare a single glance at Brandon. He was looking at the group of girls seated on the opposite table. "Ah, right. I forgot this was how he acted in the earlier chapters." Claire narrowed her eyes at Reinhard. "Please pretend this idiot isn't at our table. As for my case, I have trouble digesting food at night." "Oh, okay." Brandon was surprised, but his expressions didn't show it. "Interesting. I didn't know about that detail." Looking around, Brandon realized someone was missing. "Where's Amy? I don't see her anywhere." At Brandon's question, Claire immediately pointed in the direction of a crowd filled with men. "There," she stated, with a blank expression on her face. "Oh, there's that too." Once again, Claire pointed in another direction, just where Brandon had left Rachel to her own device. When Brandon turned to look, there was another separate crowd of men that gathered. Ah, I know. I should help them out. Go ahead. Men would be typically scared of. Smack dash. Claire put her goblet down, smacking the table as she narrowed her eyes. I dare you to finish that sentence. I mean, why you divert their attention away from Rachel and Amy because of your beauty. Did you just stutter? And no, ma'am. Brandon could feel cold sweat start to bead. In all honesty, Claire was beautiful as well. It's just her personality. I bet you're thinking about something awful again. And no, I would never. Whatever. Claire then stood up, approaching the direction of where Rachel was first. Huh, pretty bold of you, man. Raven chimed in from his side. I get to live another day. Reinhard laughed, not sparing them a glance, as he continued to look towards the group of girls seated across the table. Ha ha. Now, Brandon, you shouldn't get on a woman's bad side like that. You should respect and care for them, okay? After speaking, it seemed like he flashed a wink in the girl's direction. Noticing it, Brandon furrowed his brow. I don't want to hear that from you, womanizer. KH. Reinhard twitched as the goblet he held almost fell. I need you to do something for me. Anything, Lord Moriarty. Do you need me to kidnap someone? Or to kill someone? Brandon pinched his brow at the mention of killing someone. No, nothing like that. Oh, understood. But how can I prove my skills to you, Lord Moriarty? For now, I'll assign you to a reconnaissance mission. I see. That happens to be one of my specialties as well. Who will I be stalking? The mayor? The president? Once again, Brandon pinched his brow in frustration. Alpha was way too ecstatic. No. I just need you to scout out a specific location. I'll be sending you the details and the address. Be sure to come with a disguise, as I'll be there too. Oh, once again, you'll grace me with your presence. Once again, Brandon shuddered from the cringe. But he knew how much Alpha wanted to prove himself as much as he could. So he decided to go with it anyway. Is something wrong, Lord Moriarty? No. I'll be sending you the address now. I'll be expecting results. I wouldn't dare disappoint. Why? Click. He had to end the call as soon as possible before Alpha went overboard with the praises. At the end of the call, Brandon immediately sent the address of the party's venue, along with the details of the mission. In the venue, there was a secret passage that led to the Academy's prized artifact vault. The secret passage was constructed there because the venue was typically off-limits within the Academy during normal days. Plus, no one would expect such an important place to be directly connected to the venue. It was the perfect location. What Brandon needed was an item that was situated in the vault. Mirage Mask. Once the mask is worn, any traces of the individual's identity will cease to exist, regardless if someone was familiar with their figure. But the effect would be rendered useless if the user is seen wearing the mask. It was an artifact that belonged to a wraithbound in the early 2100s. Wraithbounds were literally what the name implied. Bounded by wraiths. Individuals who had made a pact with a wraith for a surge of power. In short, they sold their souls. The headmaster of the Academy was the one to have slain the wraithbound, which is why he was entrusted in keeping the artifact. Since the mask would be stolen by a minor antagonist in the future, then it wouldn't conflict with Raven's progression. At least, that's what Brandon thought. Click. After sending the message, Brandon could hear Belle from the other side of the room. Brandon, they said they're going to leave if you don't come out in 1 minute. Yeah, coming. Back to the party. After Claire drove away the men that crowded both Rachel and Amy, the three returned to the table. They continued to mingle, getting to know each other. It was then when Amy pulled out her phone, clasping it with both hands. Hey, we should create a group chat. I had the same thoughts. Raven retrieved his phone as well. MHM, can each of you give me your contact info so I can invite you? After Amy's instructions, she gave her phone to each person, typing down their contact information on her phone. The group chat had been established, but just as it was created, Reinhard Van was kicked by Claire Victoria. Hey, what gives? Reinhard glared daggers at Claire. Claire spared him no glance and said, Why do you add a random person in the group? Amy? Oh, sorry. Must have been a typo. The rest gave a thumbs up for what Claire did. You guys. Reinhard could only wallow in shame. As they continued to poke fun at Reinhard, a student with blue hair, adorning a suit, approached their table. Or the side where Rachel sat. "Excuse me, do you need something from us?" Claire asked him, furrowing her brow. It was obvious there was going to be trouble. After all, the man's face was flushed red, most likely drunk. "Yes, I'd like to talk to Lady Rachel over here, to continue where we left off in our discussion earlier." "I thought I already gave you my answer." Rachel's expressions were uncomfortable, causing Brandon to frown. It was because he knew who the man was. Felix Osborne, an heir to the Osborne Corporation, the company that manufactured shift porters. And the first appearance of a wraithbound in the novel. "Lady Rachel, if you give me enough time to get to know me, you might change your M. Sorry, but no still means no. Please leave our table." "You heard her. Don't make things uncomfortable now." Claire chimed in, noticing how uncomfortable Rachel was. "Now, why are you butting in our conversation?" "Hic dash," Felix said, as he let out a hiccup due to the alcohol. "The only one who's butting in the conversation is you. So please leave." "No, I'm a human with free will. You have no right to tell me when and where to go." At the mention of human, Brandon let out a chuckle. Felix turned his gaze towards him. "Did you just laugh at me?" "Who knows?" Brandon just shrugged it off, swishing the wine from his goblet. "So this is what the world has come to. Commoners thinking they're big shots just because they got accepted in Astria Academy. Hic dash. Maybe, but what kind of big shot has his fly down?" Immediately, Felix looked down at his fly, only to find it zipped up. When he did that, the group let out a chuckle of their own. "Be bastard. How dare you humiliate me?" "Hic dash. You're the only humiliating yourself. Clearly, she doesn't like you, so just go." Felix then leaned in closer to Brandon. "Why don't we take this outside, why you albino bastard? I'll teach you a lesson for messing with me." As soon as Felix uttered those words, Reinhard and Raven stood up. "Try me." Brandon narrowed his eyes, glaring daggers at Felix. Since Brandon now had power, he didn't want to become a pushover anymore. All the confidence stems from his mana disruption skill. He knew Felix might be stronger than him due to being a wraithbound. But what is he going to do if he can't conjure up a magic skill? Raven then got in between Felix and Brandon, who was still in his seat. "Okay, that's enough. Like they said, leave our table now." Raven seemed like he had enough. He could allow a little bullying when it's just him. But if it's directed towards his friends, he wouldn't let it slide. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Raven Blackheart." As soon as Raven spoke, Felix's eyes shot wide open, but quickly fixed his expressions. "Ah, the ranked 1 student. Rumors say you're a duelist. You sure you want to mess with me?" "Hic dash. You realize you'd be taking all 6 of us, right?" When Raven spoke, everyone else nodded their heads, narrowing their eyes at Felix. "Pah, whatever. Commoners like you can only put up a fight when you're grouped together." Felix waved his hand, motioning to leave, but took a little glance at Rachel and said, "Lady Rachel, I'll try again next time, so wait for me. I'll prove my love to you." Hic dash. After parting those words, Felix left, heading towards a different table. "Huh, what a stubborn bastard." Claire breathed out a sigh. Brandon then turned towards Rachel. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah. Thanks for driving him away." "Thanks, everyone." They all nodded at her appreciative gesture. Everyone then continued their conversation, trying to change the mood. It was then a waiter inconspicuously passed by. "Do you kids need a refill?" "Yes, I'd like some." As the waiter filled Brandon's goblet, the waiter passed him a crumpled paper, just fast enough for no one to notice. "Thanks. It's my pleasure, Lord Sir." Brandon furrowed his brow. He was definitely about to say, "Lord Moriarty." Around 11 p.m., the group decided to leave the party early. Claire once again volunteered to bring them home as her personal driver was waiting outside. As everyone was preparing to leave, getting inside the car, Brandon passed up on the offer. "Are you sure you're going to stay for a while?" Rachel asked Brandon with a worried look on her face. "Yeah, I don't feel like going home yet." "Okay, but remember to watch out for that guy." "Don't worry, I don't plan on running into him." "Okay, see you." "MHM, take care." Rachel was most likely worried because Felix seemed to have his eyes on Brandon due to the humiliation. With everyone inside the car, They all waved at Brandon, who was standing by the entrance. "See you, Brandon." "MHM, take care, guys." With that, the car drove off. Turning around, Brandon contoured to a serious expression as he muttered to himself, "Time to get down to business." Heading back inside, Brandon made a quick detour to the bathroom. Clank! As he hid inside one of the stalls, he retrieved the crumpled paper from his pocket, trying to uncrumple it. In the text message he sent to Alpha, he instructed him to scout out for any peculiar room that screamed secret passage, while also marking every CCTV camera that was placed in the venue. Inside the crumpled paper was a detailed map of the venue's layout. All the CCTV cameras were marked with a red cross mark. "Looks good." Brandon headed back to the party, where there were still some students that stayed. Their murmurs and laughter echoed throughout the entire venue. The reason why Brandon waited until the end was because the ones who stayed behind were usually the ones who were drunk. It would be easier to sneak around the venue without anyone noticing. There were CCTV cameras, but Brandon had already thoroughly planned everything. If there's one thing in common about the world's technological advancement, it was that they were mostly powered by mana. And what skill did Brandon have? Mana disruption. He could temporarily disable the CCTV cameras. He strode towards a peculiar waiter, acting as if he needed something. He then leaned into his ear and whispered softly, "The operation starts now. Follow me, but do it secretly." "Understood, Lord Moriarty." Brandon nodded and switched his gaze toward the camera that was keeping watch of the corridor entrance. With mana disruption, he completely disabled the camera. He strode toward the corridor while Alpha followed suit, keeping a fixed distance. Once again, there was a camera in the far corner of the corridor. He disabled it once again. Of course, if the cameras were completely disabled, then the ones who were tasked to watch would be suspicious, which is why Brandon only disabled it for a set period of time. He continued with this tactic, treading softly in each corridor, until he finally paused, peeking from the corner. From a distance, he could see two men, most likely guards. Beyond that area seems to be off limits. The secret passage was most likely there. "Alpha, you're up." Alpha nodded, putting on his best ignorant waiter act, and revealed himself to the guards. "Halt! This area is restricted. How did one of the staff even manage to get here?" "Sorry, I seem to have gotten lost. You see, I was looking for the bathroom. Could any of you show me the way?" One of the guards glanced at his partner. "You do it, Ryan." "No, you do it. I won the bet last time, Calvin." "HNGG. Fine. Right this way, but be quick. You're not supposed to be here." "Thank you. Actually, could Ryan over there come with me as well?" "Huh. Why do I have to come with you?" "It's a bit urgent, and I'm not sure how far it is. Would both of you mind showing me to the bathroom just in case?" "Fart." Alpha let out a fart. He's way too skilled at this. For the first time, Brandon genuinely praised Alpha. Fine. We don't want you shitting all over this place." "I appreciate it." With that, the two left with Alpha, heading towards wherever the guard's bathroom was. Brandon could audibly hear Alpha talking to the guards. Their chatter gradually toned down until Brandon couldn't hear them anymore. Even Alpha thought out that small detail, just so Brandon could tell if they were still nearby. He truly is a professional. Looking above the inconspicuous door, Brandon could see a CCTV on the far top corner. With mana disruption, he disabled it once again. Step. He made his way towards a door, but soon realized that the door was sealed with a thick layer of mana. Since mana disruption could only target one specific location at a time, Brandon had to act fast. Disabling the mana disruption on the camera, Brandon quickly scattered the mana that lingered on the door within the time lag of the camera's reactivation. Clank! Shutting the door, Brandon found himself in a pitch-black room. He quickly conjured up a ball of flame with elemental manipulation to illuminate the area. Scanning the area, he could see that there were multiple hallways. And since the light couldn't reach too far, the ends of the hallways were completely dark. It's almost like a maze. It actually was a maze. I could use an X-ray skill right about now. But he didn't have one. Brandon took a pause. If he traversed with no plan, then he would end up lost. He pondered on how he should mark each hallway entrance to tell if he had already gone there. Ripdash. Since he brought no other items with him, he decided to tear a piece of cloth from his suit. Whoosh! He burned the piece of fabric using the smallest amount of fire he could conjure up. This should buy me enough time. He then strode towards the first hallway. A dead end. From behind him, there were trails of cloth wrapped in flames. He followed the trail and dispersed the flames, picking up each cloth. If he left them behind, then the academy could tell that someone managed to enter the secret passage. He continued to do so until he was able to return to where he started. So the middle hallway was abuzz. He then employed the same strategy on the hallway in his left. He continued to strode forward, but another dead end. Once again, he returned to where he started and instantly entered the next hallway. It was another dead end. Again, and again, and again. This is so annoying. He ruffled his hair in frustration. This is going to take a while.